Three goddesses once stood before a shepherd and asked him to name the most beautiful. He was not a king. He was not a judge. He was a boy who herded cattle on a mountain, and his answer would burn a city to the ground and end the age of heroes forever. Hey friends, welcome back. Tonight we step into the twilight of Greek myth, from a single golden apple that started a war, to a wooden horse packed with armed men, to the last morning the children of gods ever walked the earth. Before we sink in, one small thing. If these nights help you, a like and a subscribe mean a lot. No pressure, only if it feels earned. And drop a comment. Which city are you in tonight? And what time is it there? I read every one. It's my favorite part of this, all right? Lights low, fan on if you like that soft hum. Get heavy, get comfortable. Tonight's story starts now. The wine is warm and the hall is loud. And you are a god at a wedding. You will spend the rest of eternity wishing you had skipped Mount. Pelion rises behind the feast. It slopes silver with olive trees, and the smell of roasting meat and spilled honey wine drifts up into a sky crowded with immortals. This is the marriage of a mortal king to a sea goddess, and every deity worth knowing has come down from Olympus to celebrate. And that, right there, is the problem. Because when you invite everyone, you have to actually mean everyone. They did not invite Eris. Her name means strife. She is the goddess of discord, and someone decided a wedding would go smoother without her. A reasonable thought. Also a fatal one, because she shows up anyway, uninvited, with a gift. A single apple of solid gold, and it lands in the middle of the feast with a sound like a coin dropped on marble. Everyone stops. Even gods love free things. There is writing carved into the skin. One word to the fairest, to the most beautiful. And Eris, having planted the seed, simply leaves. Here is the thing about a compliment with no name attached. It becomes a competition. Three goddesses reach for that apple at once, and each is certain the fairest could only mean her. Hera, queen of the gods. Athena, goddess of wisdom and war. And Aphrodite, goddess of love, so beautiful that flowers bloomed wherever she walked. Three of the most formidable beings in existence, and none of them will let go. They take it to Zeus because of course they do. And Zeus takes one look at a choice between his wife, his favorite daughter, and the goddess of love, and does what any wise ruler does. He passes it to someone else immediately. And who does he pick to take the fall? A shepherd. On a hill, minding cattle. His name is Paris, and he has no idea his quiet afternoon is about to end. He is handsome in the careless way of people who have never had to work at it, and his biggest concern is whether the herd wanders too close to the ridge. He does not know he is a prince. He looks up to see the messenger god Hermes descending toward him with three goddesses in tow, and his whole ordinary world quietly ends. The job is simple. Judge which goddess is the fairest, and hand her the apple. There is no version where a shepherd tells the king of the gods no. So the three most powerful goddesses in creation line up before a boy who has never left his mountain, and they do not simply let him look. They understand a fair contest is a losing contest. So each of them offers him a bribe. Hera offers power, lord of all Asia, the most powerful king who ever lived. Paris considers it, and here is the first strange thing about him. He does not seem that interested in ruling the world. Athena offers glory, the wisest man alive, the greatest warrior who ever drew breath, unbeaten in every battle. And again he shrugs. He is not ambitious. He is a young man on a hillside, and there is really only one thing on a young man's mind. Which brings us to Aphrodite. The goddess of love understands him better than the other two ever could. She offers him the most beautiful woman in the entire world as his wife. Her name is Helen, and Helen, Aphrodite promises, will love him. There is one small detail she leaves out. Helen is already married to a Greek king, but love does not read the fine print, and neither does a boy just offered the most beautiful woman alive. Paris hands Aphrodite the apple dot, and in that moment, on a quiet hill with the sun warm on the grass, a shepherd who wanted nothing to do with power or glory chooses love and seals the doom of an entire city. He does not hear it, but far to the east, on the walls of a great and shining city called Troy, the clock has just started ticking, because two goddesses have just lost. Hera and Athena walk away humiliated, rejected by a nobody with a herd. And gods do not forget. From this day the Queen of Heaven and the Goddess of War will hate Troy with a cold and patient hatred, and they will wait for the day they can watch it burn. Paris notices none of this. He tucks the promise away like a coin in his pocket and goes back to his cattle. But his life will not stay small, because Paris is not really a shepherd. He was born a prince at Troy, the son of King Priam and Queen Hecuba, and there is a reason he was sent up a mountain to herd cattle instead of raised in a palace. Before he was born, his mother dreamed she gave birth not to a child, but to a burning torch, a flame that spread from her arms and consumed the whole city of Troy until nothing was left but ash. She woke screaming, and the seers all said the same thing. This child will burn Troy to the ground. Sit with that. A mother holding a newborn told by every wise voice in the kingdom that the soft warm weight in her arms is the death of everything she loves. They could not bring themselves to kill the child, so they handed the infant to a servant and ordered him left on the slopes of Mount Ida to die of cold and hunger. And the mountain did not do it. A shepherd found the baby and raised him as his own son, far from the palace. And the boy grew tall and handsome and utterly unaware that he was a prince marked for the destruction of a kingdom. That is the boy who judged the goddesses. A death sentence that walked, a prophecy in human skin, herding cattle, waiting for the day the world would call him home. And Aphrodite's promise is exactly the thing that will call him home, because to claim the most beautiful woman in the world, Paris cannot stay a shepherd. He is going to have to walk back through the gates of the city that tried to kill him as a baby. He does not know that yet. Tonight he sleeps on the mountain under a wide field of stars, a golden apple's decision already behind him, a war he cannot imagine already ahead. The cattle low softly in the dark. The grass smells of time and dust, and a young man dreams of a woman he has never met, a woman whose face is about to launch 1,000 ships and end an age of the world. Far away, Helen sleeps too in the palace of a Greek king, with no idea that a shepherd on a distant mountain has just been promised her heart. She does not know her name is already a fuse. Not yet. Being chosen by a goddess was never a gift. It was a debt, and every debt in the end comes due. the end comes due. The road to Troy is dust and heat and the creak of a cart, and you are on it, though you do not yet know why. You are Paris. For your whole life you have been a shepherd, and this morning you are still a shepherd. But there is a restlessness in you now that was not there before. It started the day the goddesses came. Ever since Aphrodite pressed her promise into your mind like a thumbprint in wax, the mountain has felt too small. The cattle have felt too slow. You look at the horizon more than you used to. And when word comes up the slopes that King Priam of Troy is holding funeral games in the city below, games with prizes and crowds, and a prize bull to be given to the champion, something in your chest pulls tight and says go. You do not know the bull they mean to give away is one of your own, taken from your herd months ago by the king's men for exactly this purpose. You only know you want to see the city, so you go down the mountain for the first time in your remembered life, and the walls of Troy rise up in front of you, and they are the most beautiful thing you have ever seen. Troy is not a village. Troy is a wonder. Its walls are so high and so smooth that people say the gods themselves built them, and in fact, the story goes that they did, that the god Poseidon and the god Apollo raised those walls stone by stone in the time of the old king. The gates are wide enough to drive a chariot through 4 abreast. Banners hang from the towers in reds and golds. The streets climb in tiers toward a great citadel at the top, and everywhere there is the smell of the sea and cooking fires and horses and money. You have spent your life with cows. You walk into this and your mouth falls open like a child's. And then you enter the games, because why not? And you start to win. This is the strange part. You are a shepherd. You have no training, no armor, no fine chariot. And you beat them anyway. You beat the trained athletes of Troy in the races. You beat the boxers. You outrun and outfight the sons of noblemen who have practiced these sports their whole lives. And the crowd loves it, this beautiful unknown boy in rough clothes humiliating the champions of the city. But not everyone loves it, because among the men you are defeating are the actual princes of Troy, the sons of King Priam, and one of them, a proud young man named Deiphobus, does not enjoy losing to a cowherd in front of the entire kingdom. He decides to kill you. It is not a duel. It is not fair. Deiphobus simply draws his sword in a rage and comes at you across the field, and you, a shepherd unarmed, with no idea that the man trying to run you through is your own brother, do the only thing you can do. You run. You sprint across the grounds and you throw yourself at the altar of Zeus in the middle of the sacred space, because an altar is a place of protection, a place where even a furious prince cannot spill blood without offending the gods. And that is where the whole thing cracks open, because standing near that altar is a woman named Cassandra. She is your sister, though you do not know it yet, and she is a princess of Troy, and she has a gift and a curse wound so tightly together that no one can tell them apart. Cassandra can see the future perfectly. Every prophecy she speaks is true. That is the gift. The curse is this: no one will ever believe her. The god Apollo gave her the sight, and then, when she refused him, cursed her so that her every true word would fall on deaf ears. She spends her life screaming accurate warnings that everyone treats as madness. Cassandra looks at you, this trembling boy clinging to the altar, and she knows. She sees it all at once. She sees the baby left on the mountain. She sees the prophecy of the burning torch. She sees the flames, and she cries out that this stranger, this cowherd, is no stranger at all, that he is Paris, the lost son of Priam and Hecuba, the child they left to die. Come home at last. The whole field goes silent, because there are ways to check a thing like this. There are old servants who remember. There are tokens, trinkets left with the baby long ago, and when they bring the proof forward, it all matches. The impossible becomes real in front of the entire court. The shepherd is a prince. The dead child is alive. King Priam looks at this beautiful young man who has just outfought his other sons, and his heart breaks open with joy, because what father would not want a lost son returned? And here is the moment the whole war turns on, though no one in that crowd can feel it happen. Somewhere in the back of that gathering stands the old prophecy, the one everyone once believed. This child will burn Troy to the ground. It has not been forgotten. Cassandra is standing right there, and she is not celebrating. She is horrified. She is screaming, in her way, that this reunion is a catastrophe, that they should send him back to the mountain, that welcoming him home is welcoming the fire that will end them all. And no one listens. Because no one ever listens to Cassandra, King Priam, drunk on the happiness of a returned son, waves away the old fear, a dream from long ago, a superstition. Look at the boy. Look how handsome, how strong. How could this be the end of anything? He orders the celebration doubled. He brings Paris into the palace, dresses him in fine clothes, names him a prince of Troy in full, gives him rooms in the great citadel, and a place at the royal table. The cowherd who came down the mountain that morning goes to sleep that night a son of the king, in a bed softer than anything he has ever known. In the very city his birth was prophesied to destroy. Feel how easy it was. That is the horror of it. No villain forced this. No monster broke down the gates. A loving father simply could not bear to send his own child away twice, and so he pulled the fire in through the front door and gave it a bedroom. Cruelty would have saved Troy. Love is what doomed it. And that is a pattern you will see again and again before this story is done. The tender human choice, the merciful decision, the thing any of us would do, turning out to be the exact thing that kills everyone. Paris settles into his new life as a prince, and for a while it is good. But Aphrodite's promise is still in him, still whispering, and now he has something he did not have on the mountain. He has resources. He has ships. He has a royal name and a king's blessing, and a prince of Troy can do things a shepherd cannot. A prince can propose a voyage. A prince can sail across the sea to a foreign land on a matter of state. And there's a matter of state that gives him the perfect excuse. Long ago, the story goes, the Greeks took a Trojan princess named Hesione, an aunt of Paris, carried off in an earlier quarrel between the two peoples. She lives now in Greece, married to a Greek lord, and the Trojans have never stopped resenting it. So Paris goes to his father with a proposal that sounds noble and dutiful and entirely reasonable. Let me sail to Greece, he says. Let me open talks. Let me try to bring our lost princess home, or at least ease the bad blood between our nations. A diplomatic mission. A peace envoy. What could be more honorable than a prince who wants to heal an old wound? Cassandra, somewhere in the palace, is losing her mind. She sees exactly where this ship is going and exactly what it will bring back, and she cannot stop it because she never can. Another son of Troy, a prophet named Helenus, warns of disaster too, and the warnings slide off the court like rain off marble. King Priam considers the plan and finds it good. A fine idea. A prince showing initiative. He grants the ship's dot, and so Paris prepares to sail for Greece, dressed in the robes of a Trojan prince, his heart full of a goddess's promise, telling everyone, including himself, that he is going for the sake of peace. He believes it, mostly. That is the thing about a good excuse. It lets you lie to your own conscience with a straight face. He is not sailing to Greece to recover an aunt he has never met. He is sailing to Greece because a goddess told him the most beautiful woman in the world was waiting there for him. And her name was Helen, and she would be his. He does not let himself think about the part where Helen is already someone's wife. And he certainly does not think about whose wife she is, because Helen is married to Menelaus, king of Sparta, and Menelaus is not a man who forgives easily, and Menelaus has a brother. That brother is Agamemnon, the most powerful king in all of Greece, a hard and hungry man who has spent his life gathering other kings under his hand, like a farmer gathering sheaves. If you wanted to design the single worst husband in the world to steal a wife from, you could not do better than the brother of the high king of the Greeks. Paris is about to poke the one hornet's nest big enough to darken the sky, but that is still ahead. Tonight the harbor of Troy is loud with preparation. Sailors load water and grain and gifts fit for a foreign court. The ships rock at anchor under a sky going purple with dusk, their sails furled, their hulls dark against the shining water. Paris stands on the deck of the lead ship and looks west, toward Greece, toward a woman he has never seen, and the wind off the sea is warm and smells of salt and tar, and the whole wide unknown world. Behind him, in a high tower of the city, his sister Cassandra watches the ships and weeps for what she alone can see. The fire is about to go looking for its kindling, and no one, not one soul in that whole shining city, will believe her until the flames are already at the walls. You would think someone would listen to the woman who is always right. That is the cruelest joke the gods ever played. Being right was never the same as being believed. The days before the voyage stretch out, and you spend them learning what it means to be a prince, which turns out to be mostly waiting while other people argue. There are councils. There are old men with long beards debating the exact wording of the message to the Greeks. There are priests reading the flights of birds and the livers of sheep to find the right day to sail, and every reading seems to come back cloudy, uncertain, wrong somehow, though no one wants to say so out loud with the king so pleased about the whole enterprise. You sit through it all in your fine new clothes, itching under the fabric, missing the simple honesty of cattle. A cow never held a 3-hour meeting about diplomacy that you meet your brothers properly now, the ones who did not try to kill you. There is Hector, the eldest, the crown prince, and the moment you see him you understand that he is the real thing in a way you are not. Hector is tall and broad and calm, a warrior in his prime, the kind of man other men fall silent around out of respect rather than fear. He does not boast. He does not need to. He has a wife he loves named Andromache and an infant son he carries around the palace, with a tenderness that looks strange on so large a man. And when he looks at you, this newfound brother, there is warmth in it, but also something careful. Hector has heard the old prophecy, too. He does not believe in it the way Cassandra does, but he does not entirely disbelieve it either, and you can feel him weighing you, wondering what the gods have sent back into the family. You do not tell Hector about Aphrodite. You do not tell anyone. The promise is yours, a secret coal you carry cupped in your hands, and some quiet instinct warns you that if you spoke it aloud in this palace of prophecy and dread, someone might finally understand what you are about to do and stop you. So you smile and you nod, and you play the grateful returned son, and inside you count the days until the ships are ready, and all the while, moving through the corridors like a ghost no one will look at directly, there is Cassandra. You come to dread her, not because she is cruel to you, but because she is not. She corners you once in a cool stone passage near the women's quarters, and she does not rage or curse. She just takes your hand in both of hers, and her eyes are wet and enormous and utterly sane, and she tells you, quietly, exactly what will happen. She tells you the name of the woman. She tells you about the ships that will come after, more ships than you can picture, a sea gone black with them. She tells you about your brother Hector lying dead in the dust. She tells you about the walls, the beautiful God-built walls, broken open. She tells you about fire in the citadel and the screams of the women being led away in chains. And she tells you that all of it, every death, begins with the step you are about to take onto that ship, and the terrible thing, the thing you will remember on the last night of the war when the city is burning around you, is that some part of you knows she is telling the truth, but knowing a thing and being ruled by a thing are different animals. Aphrodite's promise is louder than your sister's warning. Desire always is. So you gently take your hand back from Cassandra, and you tell her she is unwell, and you watch something die in her face as she realizes that even you, even her own returned brother, will not believe her. She does not try again. She simply walks away down the corridor, and her sandals whisper on the stone, and you tell yourself you have done nothing wrong. You are only going to Greece to talk. You almost believe it. The night before you sail, you cannot sleep. You climb to the top of the citadel where the wind is strong, and you look out over the whole sleeping city. The low orange glow of banked hearth fires behind 1,000 shuttered windows. The dark shapes of the towers, the sea beyond glittering under a half-moon. Troy is so alive beneath you. Children are sleeping in those houses. Old couples. Dogs curled by doorways. Merchants and weavers and fishermen and priests. Tens of thousands of ordinary lives folded up in the dark, trusting the walls to keep them safe the way they always have. None of them know your name yet. None of them know that the handsome new prince standing on the height above them is about to reach across the sea and pull down everything they have. You breathe in the smell of your city, smoke and salt and stone still warm from the day's sun, and you tell yourself you will bring back peace. Then you go down to the harbor in the gray before dawn, and you step onto the ship, and the sailors raise the sail, and the wind fills it, and Troy slides away behind you into the morning haze. The last you see of it is the sun catching the highest tower, a single point of gold above the mist. Somewhere on that tower, though you cannot make her out, Your sister is still watching, still weeping, still right dot the sea takes you west, toward Sparta, toward Helen, toward the beginning of the end. And the wind is warm, and the water is bright, and you have never in your life felt so certain that you are doing the right thing, which is exactly how the worst mistakes always feel from the inside. Always feel from the inside. Sparta smells of wood smoke and olive groves, and you arrive as a guest, which in the ancient world is a sacred thing, and which makes what you are about to do so much worse. The ship touches the Greek shore after days of open water, and you come up from the coast to the palace of Menelaus a little unsteady on your legs, salt-dried white in your hair, dressed in the finest robes Troy could give you. You are a prince arriving at a king's house, and the Greeks receive you the way the gods command all civilized people to receive a traveler. This is called xenia, guest friendship. It is one of the most serious laws in the whole ancient world, older than any written code, watched over by Zeus himself, who carries the title Zeus Xenios, protector of guests. The rule is simple and absolute. You take in the stranger at your door. You feed him, you bathe him, you give him a place by your fire and a bed for the night, and you ask his name and his business only after he has eaten. And in return, the guest honors the house. The guest does not steal. The guest does not harm. To break guest friendship is not rudeness. It is a sin against heaven, the kind of thing the gods punish across generations. Menelaus opens his home to you completely. This is the part that should make you turn the ship around. He is not a subtle man, this king of Sparta, but he is a generous one, and he greets you with real warmth. He hosts feasts in your honor. He shows you the treasures of his hall. He treats you, a foreign prince, like a brother, because that is what a good man does. And Menelaus, for all the wars that will be fought over his wounded pride, is at heart a good and simple man who trusts the laws of the gods to hold. And then Helen walks into the hall, and every good intention you never really had evaporates like water on a hot stone. She is the most beautiful woman in the world. That is not a poet's exaggeration in this story. It is a literal fact of the myth, a thing decreed by the goddess of love herself. Helen is the daughter of Zeus, conceived when the king of the gods came to her mother in the form of a swan, which is a strange and famous story for another night. Her beauty is not entirely human, and it does something to the air of a room. Men who look at her forget what they were saying. You look at her, and you understand at last, completely, why you crossed the sea. Aphrodite did not lie. There she is, the promise made flesh, standing in her husband's hall, and the goddess of love reaches into both of your chests at once and lights the same fire, because Aphrodite promised Paris that Helen would love him, and the goddess keeps her word. What happens next is the crime that ends an age. Menelaus, trusting the laws of guest friendship, the way you trust the ground to stay under your feet, leaves. Word comes that his grandfather has died on the island of Crete, and a king must attend the funeral. And so Menelaus does something no man in the world would think twice about. He goes to bury his grandfather, and he leaves his guest in his home under his roof, because a guest is sacred, and a guest would never betray him. Before he sails, he even tells Helen to see to every need of their Trojan visitor. He hands you his trust with both hands. He could not have made himself more vulnerable if he tried. and the moment his ship is over the horizon, you take his wife. There are gentler tellings and harder ones. In some versions, Helen goes willingly, her heart turned by Aphrodite, a woman genuinely in love and choosing to run. In others, she is more taken than taking, swept along by a goddess's compulsion she cannot fight, half a victim of the same divine scheme that has used everyone in this story as a game piece. The myth has never fully decided how much of it was Helen's choice, and that uncertainty is part of why people have argued about her for 3,000 years. But the outcome is the same in every version. You load Menelaus's wife and a great deal of Menelaus's treasure onto your Trojan ships in the dead of night, and you sail east for home, back across the sea toward the god-built walls, carrying the single most dangerous cargo in the history of the world. You have broken guest friendship. You have spat on the law of Zeus himself. You have taken a Greek king's wife from under his own roof while eating his food and wearing clothes warmed at his fire. Every rule that holds the civilized world together, you have shattered in a single night for a woman a goddess dangled in front of you on a mountaintop months ago. And you feel gliding home over the dark water with Helen beside you, not guilt but triumph. The coal you carried so long is finally ablaze. You are going to bring her through the gates of Troy and show the world what you have won. You are not thinking about Menelaus coming home to an empty room. You should be. He comes back from Crete expecting his wife and his hearth and his ordinary life, and he walks into a palace where the guest is gone, and the treasury is lighter, and the bed is cold. And slowly the truth of it lands on him, and something in Menelaus breaks that will not mend until a city is ash. This is not a small man's private grief. Menelaus is a king, and more than that, he is the brother of the greatest king in Greece. He does not weep quietly and move on. He goes to his brother Agamemnon, the high king of Mycenae, the hardest and most ambitious man in all the Greek lands, and he lays the outrage before him. My guest friend stole my wife. A prince of Troy has broken the law of Zeus, and shamed my house, and shamed all of Greece. And Agamemnon, who has spent his whole life looking for a reason big enough to unite the fractious kings of Greece under his single command, who has dreamed of the wealth of Troy sitting fat and shining across the sea, guarding the trade routes to the east, looks at his brother's broken heart and sees behind it the opportunity of a lifetime. He does not have to manufacture a war. Paris has handed him one, gift-wrapped, with the blessing of heaven on the Greek side, because who could argue that avenging a broken guest law was anything but righteous? Agamemnon has his cause. Now all he needs is his army. And here is where a single theft becomes a war of nations, because of a promise made years before, a clever and fateful oath that is about to bind half the world to Menelaus's grief. Rewind for a moment to before Helen ever married. When she was young, her beauty was already legendary, and every unmarried king and prince and hero in Greece came courting, dozens of them. The most powerful men in the land all gathered in one hall, wanting the same wife. It was a dangerous situation. Whoever won her, the losers might turn violent out of jealousy, and there were enough armed and prideful kings in that room to start a civil war over one woman. Helen's mortal father, a king named Tyndareus, was terrified of exactly that. Choose one suitor, and you make enemies of all the rest. A clever man among the suitors solved it. His name was Odysseus, king of the small rocky island of Ithaca, and he was the sharpest mind in Greece, a man who won with words and schemes where others won with swords. Odysseus knew he had little chance of winning Helen himself, so he traded his cleverness for something better. He went to Tyndareus and offered a solution to the whole dangerous mess, in exchange for help marrying Helen's cousin Penelope, whom he actually wanted. And the solution was an oath. Odysseus proposed that before Helen chose, every single suitor should swear a binding vow. They would all agree on sacred oath to accept whatever man Helen picked. And more than that, they would swear that if anyone ever tried to steal her from her chosen husband, all of them, every last suitor, would take up arms and come to that husband's aid, no matter who he was or where the threat came from. It was brilliant. It turned a room full of rivals into a room full of guarantors. No one could complain about losing, because everyone had sworn to protect the winner. And so, one by one, the most powerful men in Greece stood over a sacrificed animal and swore the oath to defend Helen's marriage always, whoever won her. Menelaus won her, and every king in Greece swore to protect that marriage. Do you see the trap closing now? Do you see what Paris has actually done? He did not simply steal one man's wife. He triggered an oath sworn by dozens of the most powerful warlords in the world, an oath with the gods as witnesses, an unbreakable promise that now compels all of them to sail to war, whether they want to or not. Agamemnon does not have to beg the kings of Greece for soldiers. He simply has to remind them of what they swore. You gave your word. You stood over the blood, and you vowed. Helen has been taken. The oath is called. The oath is called. And so the summons goes out across all the Greek lands, to every king who once stood in that hall, and the machinery of the largest war the myths have ever known begins to grind into motion. Some come eagerly, hungry for glory and Trojan gold. Some come with dread. 2 of them try desperately to escape the oath entirely, and their stories are their own, and we will come to them. But the oath has them all. The clever trap that Odysseus built to keep the peace has become the very thing that drags the whole world into war. Far to the east, behind the shining walls that gods built, Paris brings Helen home to Troy, and King Priam looks at his son's stolen bride. In an act of love and pride and catastrophic foolishness, welcomes her. Cassandra screams. No one listens. The city celebrates a wedding, and out on the wine-dark sea, black hulls are gathering by the 100, prows turned toward Troy, 1,000 ships filling with grim and oath-bound men. The apple has done its work. 2 goddesses have their revenge in motion, and a shepherd's choice on a quiet mountainside has become the doom of an age. The gods gave Helen a face that could stop a man's heart. They forgot to mention it could stop 10,000 of them in the dust beneath a burning city. Beauty, it turns out, was never the gift. It was the fuse. The 2 who tried to escape are worth knowing, because they are the 2 greatest heroes on the Greek side, and neither of them wanted this war, and the gods dragged them both into it anyway. The first is Odysseus, the very man who invented the oath. There is a bitter kind of justice in it. The clever trap he built to protect Helen's marriage now reaches out and closes on its own maker, because Odysseus was a suitor too, and Odysseus swore the vow along with all the rest. When Agamemnon's men come to the little island of Ithaca to call in the oath, Odysseus does not want to go. He has everything a man could want. He has Penelope, the wife he schemed so hard to win, and he loves her truly. He has a newborn son named Telemachus. He has his rocky little kingdom and his peace, and he knows with that sharp mind of his that a war against Troy will not be quick and will not be cheap, and that a man who sails east may not sail home for a very long time, if ever. There's a prophecy hanging over him too, a warning that if he goes to Troy, he will be gone 20 years and return alone and unrecognized, stripped of everything. So Odysseus does what Odysseus always does. He tries to think his way out. When the recruiters arrive, they find the king of Ithaca apparently gone mad. Odysseus has yoked a donkey and an ox together to a plow, two animals that could never work in tandem, and he is dragging this useless plow up and down the beach, sowing salt into the sand instead of seed, laughing to himself. A broken man planting a field that will never grow. It is a good act. A man this insane clearly cannot lead troops to war. The recruiters almost believe it. But there is one among them named Palamedes, who is nearly as clever as Odysseus himself, and Palamedes suspects a trick. So he does something quietly monstrous. He takes the baby, little Telemachus, and he lays the infant down in the sand directly in the path of the plow, and Odysseus stops. Of course he stops. No madman would swerve to avoid a child he could not comprehend, but Odysseus swerves, because Odysseus is perfectly sane and will not run a plow over his own son to keep up a lie. And in that single instant of fatherly instinct, the whole performance collapses. Palamedes lifts the baby from the furrow and looks at the king of Ithaca, and both of them know the game is over. Odysseus is sane. The oath holds. He must go to war. He will never forget who exposed him, and Palamedes will one day pay a terrible price for this cleverness. But that is far ahead. For now the sharpest mind in Greece straightens up on that beach and puts away his madness like a costume and accepts that he is going to Troy. He kisses his wife. He holds his son, and he begins to prepare, and if his kingdom is to sail to war, then Odysseus will make sure it sails to win, because a man who cannot avoid a thing may as well be the best in the world at it. The second reluctant. Hero is not reluctant himself. His mother is reluctant for him, and she has good reason, because her son is the single greatest warrior who will ever live, and she knows exactly how his story ends. His name is Achilles, and he is the son of that same sea goddess, Thetis, whose wedding started this whole disaster, married to the mortal king Peleus. When Achilles was born, Thetis knew a prophecy about him that no mother should have to carry. Her son was fated to 2 possible lives, and he could only have one. If Achilles stayed home, away from Troy, he would live a long and quiet life, grow old, be forgotten, and die peacefully as an ordinary man. But if Achilles went to Troy, he would win immortal glory, his name sung for 3,000 years, the greatest hero of the greatest war, and he would die young on the plains before the city and never come home. A long, dull life or a short, blazing one. Thetis, being a mother, wanted her son alive. She did not care about glory. She cared about the warm, living weight of her child, and she would do anything to keep the war from taking him. So when the summons goes out, Thetis hides Achilles. She takes her son, a young man already so strong, and so gifted in arms that his fame is beginning to spread. And she disguises him as a girl and sends him to live among the daughters of a king on a distant island, hidden in the women's quarters, dressed in women's clothes, a warrior concealed in a sewing room. And there Achilles waits, safe, useless to the war, exactly where his mother wants him, alive and anonymous and far from the walls of Troy. But the Greeks need Achilles. There is a prophecy, one of many wound through this war, that Troy can never fall without him. So Agamemnon sends the one man who can always find what is hidden. He sends Odysseus. Odysseus comes to the island disguised as a traveling merchant, and he spreads out his wares before the king's daughters: fine cloth, jewelry, ribbons, all the pretty things young women love. The disguised Achilles is among them, indistinguishable, just another girl admiring the goods. And Odysseus, clever as ever, has hidden something among the trinkets. Tucked in with the jewelry and the fabric lies a sword and a shield. The girls flock to the ornaments, but one of them, drawn as if by instinct, reaches instead for the weapon, closes a strong hand around the hilt, and hefts the shield with an ease no sewing-room maiden could manage. And Odysseus smiles, because he has found the greatest warrior in the world hiding in a dress, given away by the pull of his own nature toward the blade. Achilles is unmasked. And here the young hero makes his own choice, because unlike his mother, Achilles is not afraid of the prophecy. He knows the terms. He knows that going to Troy means dying young, and he chooses it anyway. He would rather burn bright and brief and be remembered forever than live long and quiet and fade. He chooses glory over years, the short blazing life over the long dull one, and he takes up the sword Odysseus laid in the trap and agrees to sail. His mother's love could not save him, because her son did not want to be saved from greatness. He wanted the thing that would kill him, and he will get it. So they gather. From every corner of the Greek world they come, oath-bound and glory-hungry and grim, kings and princes and heroes, to a windy harbor called Aulis, where the whole fleet assembles. And the number the myth gives is staggering. 1,000 ships. Some say more. The bay at Aulis fills with black hulls until you cannot see the water. Mast after mast after mast, the largest army the world has ever known, all summoned by one stolen wife and one clever oath. Agamemnon walks among his gathered fleet as the high king of the greatest force ever assembled, and his heart swells with it. And somewhere under that pride sits the seed of the arrogance that will nearly lose him everything. They have their cause. They have their heroes. They have their 1,000 ships. All they need now is a wind to carry them east, across the wine-dark sea, to the god-built walls where Helen waits behind the towers and Paris sleeps beside his stolen prize. But the wind, when they call for it, does not come. The sails hang slack at Aulis. The sea lies flat and dead. Day after day, the greatest army in the world sits stranded in a windless bay, and no one can understand why the gods will not let them sail until a prophet reads the will of heaven and tells Agamemnon the price of his wind. And it is a price so terrible that the High King's first great choice in this war will be whether to pay it, and that choice, and what it costs him, is where the road to Troy truly turns dark. The gods had given the Greeks their 1,000 ships. They simply forgot to mention what the crossing would cost before a single sword was drawn. The war had not begun, and it had already started asking for children. The bay at Alice is a mirror, and a mirror is the worst thing a sailor can see, because a mirror means no wind, and no wind means the greatest army in the world is going nowhere at all. Picture it. 1,000 ships drawn up on the shore, and riding at anchor, their sails hanging limp as wet laundry, and around them tens of thousands of the fiercest men in Greece, armed and eager, and utterly stuck. Day after day the sea lies flat and shining under a hot sky, not a breath of air to fill a single sail. The men grow restless. Restless men in a camp start to drink and to argue and to fight, and the food that was meant to feed an army on campaign is being eaten in a harbor while they wait for a wind that will not come. Agamemnon, high king of all the Greeks, walks the shoreline and feels his grand war curdling before it has even begun. An army cannot sit forever. Soon the kings who followed him here will start asking why they left their kingdoms to sunbathe on a beach in a ice dot. So Agamemnon does what leaders in these stories always do when nature turns against them. He calls for the prophet. The seer's name is Calchas, and he is the fleet's own prophet, a man who reads the will of the gods in the flight of birds and the smoke of sacrifice, and everything he says comes true. Agamemnon demands to know why the winds have died. Which god have we offended? What must we do to sail? And Calchas, when he has consulted the signs, goes very quiet, because the answer he has found is one no prophet wants to carry to a king. The goddess Artemis is angry. Artemis, the huntress, the fierce virgin goddess of wild things and wild places, protector of young creatures. And she is angry at Agamemnon personally. The tellings differ on exactly why. In some, Agamemnon killed a sacred deer in her grove, and boasted that he hunted better than the goddess herself. That particular flavor of arrogance the Greeks called hubris, that the gods punish above all things. In others he simply failed some old vow. But the cause matters less than the cure, and the cure is monstrous. Calchas tells Agamemnon that Artemis will not release the winds until the high king pays her a price, and the price is his own daughter. Agamemnon must sacrifice his eldest girl, a young woman named Iphigenia, upon the altar of the goddess. Only then will the wind blow. Only then can the fleet sail for Troy. Sit with the weight of that. A father is told by an authority he cannot doubt that the road to his war runs across his daughter's life, that the winds themselves are being held hostage against her blood. And here is the first great tragedy of the Greek side, the one that poisons Agamemnon's house for a generation, because a good man, a truly good man, would refuse. A good man would say, let the ships rot, let the war die in the harbor. No crown and no conquest, and no wounded brother's pride is worth my child. And he would go home and grow old with his daughter alive. But Agamemnon is not that man. He is proud and he is ambitious, and he has 10,000 men watching to see whether their high king has the will to lead them. And slowly, horribly, over sleepless nights on that windless shore, he talks himself into it. He tells himself he has no choice. He tells himself the gods demand it. He tells himself a king belongs to his army before he belongs to his family. Every one of these is a lie a frightened man uses to do a thing he knows is wrong, and Agamemnon uses all of them, but he cannot simply send for his daughter to be killed. Iphigenia is far away, safe at home in Mycenae, with her mother, Queen Clytemnestra. So Agamemnon does something that curdles the crime into something even colder. He lies. He sends a message home saying that Iphigenia is to be brought to Aulis at once, not to die, but to be married. He tells his wife that the greatest hero in the army, the young and glorious Achilles, has asked for their daughter's hand, and that the wedding will be held here in the camp before the fleet sails. What mother would not leap at that? Her daughter wed to the finest warrior in Greece. Clytemnestra dresses the girl in bridal clothes and travels to Aulis with a mother's joy, bringing her child to what she believes is the happiest day of the girl's life. She is bringing her to an altar. The deception is almost the worst part. Iphigenia arrives radiant, expecting a husband, and her father can barely look at her. Achilles himself, when he learns his name has been used as bait in this horror without his knowledge, is enraged. He wanted no part of it, and in some versions he tries to stop the whole thing, drawing his sword against the entire army to defend a girl he was never truly meant to marry. But the army wants its wind. The men have learned the price of sailing, and a mob of soldiers that desperate to go to war is a terrible thing, and even Achilles cannot hold back thousands of them. Clytemnestra, when she finally understands what her husband has really summoned their daughter for, becomes something beyond grief. She begs, she rages. She reminds Agamemnon that this is his child, his blood, the little girl who used to sit on his knee. And Agamemnon, weeping, ashamed, utterly resolved, does it anyway. There are two endings to Iphigenia's story, and the Greeks told both. In the harder one, the girl is led to the altar, and after her first terror she chooses courage, telling her father she will die willingly for Greece, so that the ships may sail, and the knife falls, and a daughter's blood buys a war. In the gentler one, at the very last moment, the goddess Artemis takes pity. She snatches the girl away in a cloud, and leaves a deer on the altar in her place, and carries Iphigenia off to a distant land to serve as her priestess, alive but lost to her family forever. Either way, Iphigenia vanishes from her mother's world on that altar. Either way, Clytemnestra watches her husband raise a blade over their child, and either way, the wind comes. The moment the sacrifice is complete, the air stirs. A breeze off the water, then a wind filling the slack sails, snapping the banners taut, and a great cry goes up from the army, because at last, they can sail. The men rush to their ships. The oars go out. The 1,000 black hulls slide off the shore of Aulis and turn their prows east toward Troy, driven by a wind bought with a girl's life. And Agamemnon stands on the deck of his ship, a conqueror bound for glory, and a father who has murdered his own daughter. And both of those men will sail all the way to Troy inside one body, and neither will ever be free of the other. Behind him, on the shore, Clytemnestra watches the fleet dwindle toward the horizon, and something in the queen goes cold and still and permanent. She does not weep for long. She turns, and she goes home to Mycenae to rule in her husband's absence, and she begins in the silence of that great empty palace to wait. Agamemnon thinks he has left a grieving wife behind. He has left an enemy. He will be gone 10 years fighting for Troy, and every one of those years Clytemnestra will remember the bridal dress and the altar and the knife, and she will nurse her hatred like a fire she never lets go out. And on the day her husband finally comes home in triumph from the war, she will be waiting for him with a plan of her own. But that reckoning is a decade away, and it belongs to another night dot, for now the fleet sails east, and the war they are sailing to is not the war they imagine, because every man on those ships believes Troy will fall quickly. How could it not? The greatest army ever assembled against a single city. They are picturing a season of fighting, a swift and glorious victory, a return home before the crops fail twice. Not one of them imagines that the walls of Troy, the walls that God's built, will hold against them for 10 long years. Not one of them imagines how many of these 1,000 ships will never sail home. How many of these eager men will be buried in foreign dirt beneath those towers? How much of their youth and their lives this one stolen woman will cost before the end? They are sailing toward 10 years of their lives. They think it is a summer's work. That gap between the war they expect and the war they will get is the cruelest thing the gods have arranged in all of this. And the gods have arranged a great deal. Agamemnon paid the highest price a man can pay before the first blow of the war was ever struck. He believed it bought him a swift victory. It bought him 10 years, a ruined house, and a wife sharpening a grudge across the sea. The gods never did give refunds. The coast of Troy rises out of the morning sea, and the first thing the Greeks learn is that a prophecy has followed them across the water. And prophecies in this war are never kind. There is a warning hanging over the landing, spoken before the fleet ever left Greece. The first Greek to set foot on Trojan soil will be the first Greek to die. Every man on those 1,000 ships has heard it. And so, as the black hulls scrape up onto the beach and the ramps come down, something strange happens in the greatest army in the world. Nobody wants to be first. Thousands of warriors who cross the sea for glory suddenly find their sandals very interesting, because glory is one thing, and being the guaranteed first corpse of the war is another. The ships rock at the shoreline. The Trojans are massing on the beach above to stop the landing, and the invasion stalls, held in place not by the enemy, but by a prophecy and the simple human wish to not be the one it lands on dot. Then one man jumps. His name is Protesilaus, and he leaps from his ship down onto the sand of Troy. First of all the Greeks, knowing exactly what the prophecy says, choosing to die so that the landing can begin. And it begins. His courage breaks the spell, and the army pours off the ships behind him, and the fighting on the beach is immediate and brutal. Protesilaus fights well and kills many, but the prophecy is the prophecy, and before long Hector himself, or one of the great Trojan champions, cuts him down. And the first Greek to touch Trojan soil becomes the first Greek to fall on it, exactly as foretold. Far away in Greece, his young wife will hear of it and be so undone by grief that her story becomes one of the saddest small tragedies of the whole war. But the beach is taken. The Greeks are ashore. The war for Troy has truly begun. And now they meet the thing that will define the next 10 years of their lives. The walls. You have to understand what the Greeks are looking at when they finally stand before the city. Troy is not going to fall in a season, and the moment they see it up close, the smarter among them know it. The walls are enormous, higher than any siege ladder, and so smooth and so perfectly fitted that there are no handholds, no gaps, no weakness a man can exploit. Remember, the story says gods built these walls, that Poseidon and Apollo raised them stone by stone, and whether you believe that or not, the walls behave as though it were true. Arrows glance off them. Rams cannot breach them. The gates are massive and barred, and behind them the city has wells and storehouses and farmland within reach, enough to feed itself through a long, long siege. The Greeks have not arrived to storm a city. They have arrived to sit outside one, and the sitting is going to take 10 years dot, so the war settles into a shape that surprises everyone who imagined a quick and shining victory. It is not one grand battle. It is a decade of a strange grinding stalemate. The Greeks build a fortified camp on the beach beside their ships, a whole city of tents and huts and earthworks, and they will live there for 10 years, growing old, some of them. In the shadow of walls they cannot climb. They cannot get into Troy, but Troy cannot drive them back into the sea either. So the two sides settle into a rhythm of raids and skirmishes and single combats out on the plain between the camp and the city, the great dusty field where most of the war's famous fighting happens, while the walls loom over all of it uncrossable, patient, waiting dot to keep the army fed and paid through this endless siege. The Greeks turn to raiding. They cannot crack Troy, so they crack everything around it. Achilles and the other champions lead expeditions up and down the coast and out to the nearby islands, sacking the smaller cities allied to Troy, seizing their grain and their gold and their people, dragging the plunder back to the beach camp to sustain the war. For years, this is what the war actually is. Not the siege of one city, but the slow bleeding of a whole region. Town after town falling to the Greek champions while Troy itself stands untouched behind its god-built stone. Achilles alone is said to have sacked more than a dozen cities in these years, and every one of them feeds his growing legend. The young hero who chose a short blazing life, blazing brighter with every conquest. And here we should stop and look at the man who is quietly the greatest warrior in the world, because the war is about to turn on his pride. And to understand the turning, you have to understand him. Achilles is not like the other Greek heroes. There is something almost more than human in him, and there is a reason for that beyond his goddess mother. The most famous story about his childhood, though the oldest versions tell it differently, is the one that gave us a phrase people still use 3,000 years later. When Achilles was a baby, his mother Thetis, desperate as ever to protect him from his fated early death, is said to have dipped him into the waters of the river Styx, the black river of the underworld, whose waters make flesh invulnerable. She held him by one heel and lowered him in, and the magic water touched every part of him and made his skin proof against any weapon, every part except the heel where her fingers gripped him, the one small patch the water never reached. And so Achilles grows up all but impossible to wound, a warrior no blade can cut, save for that single vulnerable heel that no one thinks about, the one flaw in an otherwise unkillable man. You already know 3,000 years later exactly which part of the body will end his story. That is why we still call a person's hidden weakness their Achilles heel. The Greeks built the phrase into the world, and it has never left. Whether by the river or simply by his divine blood, the effect is the same. Achilles on the battlefield is death itself. When he fights, the Trojans break and run, because there is no standing against a man who cannot be cut down. He is faster, stronger, and more terrible than any other warrior on either side, and both armies know it. The Greeks' whole hope rests on him. The Trojans' whole dread is of him. And this is exactly why what happens between Achilles and Agamemnon is so catastrophic, because the entire Greek war effort depends on the goodwill of a single proud young man. And Agamemnon, high king and expert in bad decisions, is about to insult that young man's honor in front of the whole army. The trigger, when it comes, is a woman, because in this war it is always a woman. During the years of raiding, both Agamemnon and Achilles have taken captives from the sacked cities, and each has been given a woman as his prize of honor, not merely a servant, in the brutal logic of that world, but a public symbol of a warrior's status and worth. Agamemnon's prize is a young woman named Chryses, and here is the problem. Chryses is the daughter of a priest of the god Apollo, and her father comes to the Greek camp, an old man carrying the sacred tokens of his god, and he begs Agamemnon humbly to let him ransom his daughter home, offering a fortune for her return. Agamemnon, in a display of the arrogance that follows him everywhere, refuses. Worse, he insults the old priest and drives him roughly from the camp, sending a priest of Apollo away shamed and empty-handed and grieving. And the old man, walking back along the shore, lifts his hands and prays to his god for justice. Apollo hears him. The god of the silver bow comes down from Olympus in fury, and the Greeks feel his anger as a plague. Apollo walks unseen through the beach camp and looses his arrows, and where they strike, sickness follows. First the pack animals die, the mules and the dogs. Then the men. Day after day the plague spreads through the crowded camp, the funeral fires burning without pause. More and more of the great army dying not on the battlefield, but in their own tents, struck down by an angry god because their high king could not bring himself to return one girl to her father. For 9 days the arrows of Apollo fall, and the Greeks die by the score, and no one yet knows why. On the 10th day, Achilles calls an assembly of the army, because someone has to, and demands that a prophet be consulted to find out which god they have offended and how to appease him. And Calchas the seer, the same prophet who once demanded a princess's blood at Aulis, rises to speak, but he is afraid because he knows the answer, and the answer names the most powerful man in the camp. Calchas will only speak if Achilles promises to protect him. Achilles swears it, and so the prophet tells the truth. Apollo is punishing the army because Agamemnon insulted his priest and refused to return Chryses. The plague will not lift until the girl is given back to her father freely, with no ransom, along with proper offerings to the god. The whole army turns to look at Agamemnon, and Agamemnon, publicly cornered, publicly blamed, forced to give up his prize of honor, in front of every king and soldier he commands, is humiliated. And a humiliated Agamemnon does not accept blame gracefully. He agrees to return the girl because he must, because the alternative is watching his army die, but he demands compensation for his wounded pride. If he must give up his prize, then he will simply take someone else's. And his eye falls on the finest prize in the camp, the woman awarded to Achilles. Everyone standing in that assembly feels the ground shift, because this is no longer about a captive girl. This is Agamemnon, the high king, reaching out to publicly strip the greatest warrior in the world of his honor, to take Achilles' prize simply to prove that he can, that a king outranks a hero, that Achilles, for all his glory, is still a subject who can be shamed at will. It is the single stupidest thing Agamemnon could possibly do, and he does it out of nothing but bruised pride. And the consequences of this one petty act of ego will kill more Greeks than any Trojan spear, because Achilles does not forget an insult, and the rage that is about to rise in the greatest warrior in the world will not fall on Troy, it will fall on his own side. He will withdraw from the war entirely, take his men out of the fighting, and sit in his tent by the ships while the Greeks he abandons are slaughtered against the walls, and he will pray, this hero, for his own army to lose, so that Agamemnon will learn what it cost to shame Achilles. The wrath of Achilles is where the greatest of all the war's stories truly begins, and it opens not with a battle, but with two proud men on a beach, each too vain to yield, while a whole army waits to pay for it. Achilles stands in the assembly with his hand on his sword, and for one long breath the whole war balances on whether he draws it, because the man he wants to kill is his own commander. Agamemnon has just announced that he will take Achilles' prize, the woman Briseis, to replace the girl he must return to the priest. And Achilles, the greatest warrior in the world, feels a rage rise in him unlike anything he has ever known. Not battle fury, something colder and more personal. He has done the fighting. He has sacked the cities. He has bled for this war while Agamemnon sat safe in command. And now the High King means to humiliate him in front of the entire army, to reach out and take the one public token of his honor, simply to prove he can. Achilles' hand closes on his sword hilt. He is a heartbeat from cutting Agamemnon down where he stands, and no man in that camp could stop him if he did. And then a goddess catches his arm. The myth says Athena herself descends, visible only to Achilles, and stays his hand, telling him to hold the blade, to wound Agamemnon with words instead of iron, and promising that one day he will be repaid 3 times over for this insult. Whether you read it as a real goddess or as the last thread of Achilles' own reason, pulling him back from murdering his commander, the effect is the same. He does not draw, but he does something that will cost the Greeks more dearly than any single death. He renounces the war. Achilles stands before the whole army and tells Agamemnon exactly what he thinks of him. He calls him a king who feeds on his own people, a coward who reaps the glory that better men bleed for, a shameless, grasping thing wearing a crown. And then he makes his vow. He is done. He and his men, the fearsome warriors called the Myrmidons, will not fight another day for Agamemnon. They will sit by their ships and watch. And when the Trojans come, when Hector breaks the Greek line and drives them back into the sea, when the men are dying by the 100 and screaming for the one warrior who could save them, then Achilles says Agamemnon will finally understand what he threw away when he shamed the best of the Greeks. He throws down the speaker's staff and walks out, and Agamemnon, too proud to back down, sends his heralds to Achilles' tent and takes Briseis anyway, and so the greatest warrior in the world goes to his tent by the ships, and he sits down, and he does not get up. For a long stretch of the war, the deadliest man alive simply removes himself from it, nursing his wounded honor, while the army that needs him more than anything is left to face Troy without him. But Achilles does not stop at withdrawing. He goes further, and this is the part that shows how deep the wound in his pride runs. He goes down to the shore alone, and he calls out across the water to his mother, the sea goddess Thetis, and she rises up out of the gray wave to comfort her weeping son. And Achilles asks her for something terrible. He asks her to go to Zeus, king of the gods, and beg him to turn the tide of the whole war against the Greeks, to let the Trojans win, to let Hector drive the Greek army back to their ships and slaughter them there, so that Agamemnon will be forced to crawl to Achilles and beg for help, and learn in blood exactly what his arrogance has cost. This is the greatest hero of the Greeks praying for his own army to be defeated. That is how far a proud man will go when his honor is wounded, and Thetis, loving her doomed son, agrees to ask. She goes up to Olympus and clasps the knees of Zeus and makes the plea, and Zeus, who owes her a favor, bows his head in agreement. The war will turn against the Greeks. Achilles will have his terrible vindication, and it happens. With Achilles gone from the field, everything changes. The Trojans, who for years have huddled behind their walls, dreading the unkillable Greek champion, suddenly find that champion absent, and they pour out onto the plain with new courage. And leading them is the one Trojan great enough to turn the war. Hector. We have met Hector already, but now he steps fully into the light, because with Achilles sulking in his tent, Hector becomes the greatest warrior on the field, and he is everything Achilles is not. Where Achilles fights for personal glory and burns with wounded ego, Hector fights for something simpler and more human. He fights for his home. He is the crown prince of Troy, the eldest son of old King Priam, the shield of the whole city, and he did not want this war. Remember, it was his brother Paris whose selfishness brought the Greeks down on them. Hector knows the war is his brother's fault. He knows in his heart that Troy may well fall because of one man's stolen bride. And he fights anyway, day after day, year after year. Not for himself, but because behind those walls are his aging father, his mother, his wife, and his infant son, and someone has to stand between them and the sea of Greek spears. Hector is the best of the Trojans, not because he is the strongest, though he is very strong, but because he is the most dutiful, the most loving, the most reluctant. He is a good man carrying a war he never chose. There is a scene between Hector and his wife that is one of the most tender moments in all of ancient literature, and it tells you everything about who he is. Before he goes out to a great day of battle, Hector comes home to the city to see his wife Andromache and their baby son. Andromache meets him on the walls, and she is afraid, because she has already lost her father and her brothers to this war, and Hector is all she has left in the world. She begs him not to go back out, to fight defensively, to stay safe, because if he dies she will have nothing. And Hector gently tells her he cannot. He would be ashamed to hide behind the walls while other men die. He must lead. It is who he is. But then he reaches out to hold his baby son, and the child, frightened by the great horsehair crest waving on his father's war helmet, bursts into tears and shrinks away. And Hector, the mightiest warrior in Troy, laughs and takes off the terrifying helmet and sets it shining on the ground, and lifts his son into his arms and kisses him, and prays aloud that the boy will grow up to be a greater man than his father, Then he hands the child back to his weeping wife, and picks up the helmet, and goes out to war. Sit with that image. The man in the bronze armor, setting down the thing that scared his child, holding his baby in the sunlight on the walls of the city he is about to die defending. That is the heart of Hector. He knows he is probably going to lose. He knows the odds. He fights for his family and his city with no illusions of glory, only duty and love. And that is what makes his story break your heart in a way Achilles never quite does. But love and duty are not the same as invincibility. And now the war turns brutal. With Zeus tilting the battle and Achilles absent, Hector leads the Trojans in a great surge against the Greek camp. For days the fighting rolls back and forth across the plain, and slowly, terribly, the Greeks are driven backward. Hector fights like a man possessed, cutting down Greek champions, pushing the whole army back toward the beach, back toward the ships. The Greeks who mocked Troy for hiding behind walls now find themselves being shoved into the sea, and the great heroes who remain, brave men, mighty men, cannot hold the line without Achilles. Agamemnon himself fights and is wounded. One by one the Greek champions fall injured or are driven back, and the Trojans press closer and closer to the ships, until at last Hector reaches them and calls for fire, meaning to burn the Greek fleet to ash and strand the whole army on the shore to die. This is the exact disaster Achilles prayed for. His own side backed against their ships, about to be destroyed. And in his tent, the greatest warrior in the world hears the screams and the clash and the roar of Hector at the ships, and part of his terrible wish has come true. Agamemnon, desperate now, humbled at last, sends envoys to Achilles, offering to give Briseis back untouched, to pay a fortune in gold, to grant him honors beyond counting, anything, if only he will return to the fight and save them. And here Achilles' rage reveals its own poison. He refuses. Even now, with his comrades dying, with the ships about to burn, his wounded pride is stronger than his mercy. He will not accept the apology. He will not fight. He would rather watch it all burn than let go of the insult. And in refusing, he crosses a line, because a man is allowed his anger. But Achilles is choosing his anger over the lives of everyone he ever fought beside. And the gods are watching. And the price for that kind of pride is always paid, usually by the person you love most. Because there is one man in Achilles' tent who cannot bear to watch the Greeks die. His name is Patroclus, and he is Achilles' dearest companion in all the world, the person Achilles loves above everyone. And Patroclus is about to make a choice that will end the wrath of Achilles and turn the whole war, and it will cost a life that Achilles values more than his own. Achilles wanted his enemies to suffer, and he got exactly that. The gods have a cruel habit of granting a proud man's wish in full, and then handing him the bill. And the bill for this wish is about to be written in the blood of the one person Achilles cannot live without. Achilles cannot live without. Patroclus stands in the doorway of the tent, with tears running down his face, and he has come to ask his beloved friend for the one thing that will get him killed. The ships are burning, or nearly so. Hector is at the shoreline. The screams of dying Greeks carry across the whole camp, and Patroclus cannot take it any more. He is a gentle soul, this man, kinder than Achilles, less consumed by pride. and watching the men he has fought beside for 10 years slaughtered against their own ships, while the greatest warrior in the world sulks in his tent as more than his heart can hold. So he comes to Achilles, and he weeps and he begs. "If you will not fight," he says, "then at least let me. Lend me your armor. Let me lead the Myrmidons out. The Trojans think you are still refusing to fight, but if they see your armor coming, if they think Achilles himself has returned to the field, the terror alone might break them and drive them back from the ships. Just let me wear your armor and save the men." And Achilles, whose rage has already cost so much, agrees to a half measure that will destroy him. He will not fight himself, but he lets Patroclus put on his famous armor and take his men into battle. He gives his friend one order, and it is a wise order, and Patroclus will not keep it. Drive the Trojans back from the ships, Achilles tells him. Save the fleet, and then stop. Do not chase them across the plain. Do not pursue them to the walls of Troy. Push them back and come home to me. Achilles has a bad feeling, the shadow of the prophecies that hang over his whole life, and he wants his friend safe. Push them back, then turn around. That is all. Patroclus straps on the armor of the greatest warrior in the world, and it works exactly as they hoped. The Myrmidons pour out onto the field, and the Trojans see the gleaming armor of Achilles at their head, and their courage shatters, because they believe the unkillable one has returned. They break and run. Patroclus and the Myrmidons drive them back from the ships in a great bloody surge, saving the Greek fleet, turning the whole tide of the battle in an afternoon. And Patroclus, this gentle man, discovers something in himself he did not know was there. He is magnificent in battle, wearing his friend's armor filled with the fury of finally fighting after all this waiting. He cuts down Trojan after Trojan, champion after champion, and the killing lifts him, intoxicates him, carries him forward. He forgets the order. He should stop. He should turn around. He is winning too hard to stop. He chases the Trojans all the way across the plain to the very walls of Troy, and under those walls the god Apollo is waiting, because Patroclus has gone too far, and the gods do not permit a mortal to storm the god-built city before its fated hour. 3 times Patroclus tries to scale the great walls of Troy, and 3 times Apollo himself throws him back. And then the god does something worse. As Patroclus fights on in the press of battle, Apollo comes up behind him unseen, and with one tremendous blow strikes the helmet from his head, and the spear from his hand, and the shield from his arm, and looses the armor from his body, leaving the man who wore the armor of Achilles suddenly exposed and dazed and defenseless in the middle of the enemy. It is not a fair death. It is a god unmaking a mortal so that other men can finish him. A Trojan spear takes Patroclus in the back, and then Hector, seeing the great warrior stunned and wounded and stripped, drives his own spear home, and Patroclus falls. He does not die instantly, and his last words are a prophecy of his own. He looks up at Hector standing over him in triumph and tells him not to boast, because Hector did not truly defeat him. A god struck him down first, and Hector only finished what Apollo began. And more than that, Patroclus says, Hector himself has not long to live, for death is already standing close beside him. And with those words the gentle friend of Achilles dies in the dust before the walls of Troy, wearing borrowed armor. killed by a spear meant in truth for the man he loved. Then Hector strips the armor of Achilles from the body of Patroclus and puts it on himself. Now the news must travel back across the plain to the tent by the ships. And this is the moment the whole war has been building toward, because Achilles does not yet know. He is waiting for his friend to come home, and a messenger comes running instead, and tells him that Patroclus is dead, killed by Hector, and that the Trojans are fighting even now over his stripped body. The grief that takes Achilles is so total that the myth says it is heard by his mother in the depths of the sea. He collapses into the dirt. He pours ashes over his own head and tears his hair and weeps with a sound so terrible that his mother rises from the ocean once more. And this time she cannot comfort him, because there is no comfort. The proud rage that made him withdraw, the wounded ego that made him pray for the Greeks to lose, the stubbornness that made him refuse Agamemnon's apology and send Patroclus out in his place, all of it. Every choice led here, to his dearest friend lying dead under the walls of Troy, because Achilles was too proud to fight himself. He knows it. That is the worst of it. He knows that his own pride killed the person he loved most, and there is nothing on earth or in heaven that can undo it. And in that instant, the wrath of Achilles changes its target completely. He is done being angry at Agamemnon. That whole quarrel evaporates like morning mist, small and stupid now beside the enormity of his loss. All of his rage, all of his grief, all of his terrible, unkillable power turns and points in one direction. Hector, the man who killed Patroclus. Achilles wants Hector dead more than he has ever wanted anything, more than glory, more than honor, more than his own life. And hear the prophecy that has shadowed him since birth comes due, because his mother tells him, weeping, the thing he already half knows. If he kills Hector, his own death will follow swiftly after. The two are bound together by fate. Slay Hector, and you will not long outlive him. And Achilles, without hesitation, chooses death. He would rather die avenging Patroclus than live having failed to. His short blazing life is about to blaze its brightest and burn out. His mother goes to the god of the forge and has new armor made for her son. Divine armor, a shield covered in the whole world worked in metal. And Achilles puts it on, and he goes out to war at last. And the Trojans, who have been winning, who drove the Greeks to their ships, look up and see the true Achilles returning to the field wild with grief and fury. And every one of them knows the war has turned again, and this time there will be no mercy in it. What follows is slaughter. Achilles goes through the Trojan army like fire through dry grass, killing everyone in his path, so many that the very river of Troy is said to choke with the dead and rise up against him in protest. He is not fighting for glory now. He is fighting to reach one man, and the Trojans flee before him back toward the walls, back toward the safety of the city, all of them pouring in through the gates in terror, all of them except one, all of them except one. Hector waits outside the walls. Alone his parents, old Priam and Queen Hecuba, stand on the walls above and scream at him to come inside, to save himself, not to face Achilles in his madness. His wife Andromache does not yet even know the danger. And Hector stands before the gate and wrestles with himself, and this is his moment of tragic greatness. He knows he should go in. He knows Achilles will likely kill him, but he cannot. It was his leadership that pushed the Greeks to the ships, his confidence that led the army out, and he is too responsible, too much the shield of his people, to run inside and hide while facing the consequence of his own command. If he retreats now, he thinks the shame would be unbearable. So Hector, the best of the Trojans, the loving father who set down his helmet for his frightened son, chooses to stand and face the greatest warrior in the world, knowing what it will cost him, because that is who he is. And then, when Achilles finally bears down on him in that terrible divine armor, even Hector's courage fails for a moment, as anyone's would, and he runs. 3 times the two of them race around the great walls of Troy, Achilles pursuing, Hector fleeing, the whole city watching from above, unable to help. 3 full circuits of the city, the fastest man alive chasing the bravest, until at last the gods themselves decide Hector's hour has come. Athena, who hates Troy, plays a cruel trick. She takes the form of one of Hector's own brothers and appears beside him, promising to stand and fight alongside him, 2 against 1. And Hector, heartened, believing he is no longer alone, stops running and turns to face Achilles at last. And when he looks for his brother to fight beside him, there is no one there. Athena has vanished. He has been deceived by a goddess into making his stand, and now he is alone, and it is too late to run. Hector faces it with dignity. He knows now that the gods have marked him for death, that Athena has tricked him, that this is the end. And he asks Achilles for only one thing, a pact between them, that whichever of them wins will treat the other's body with honor, will return it to his people for proper burial rather than defiling it. It is a fair request, an honorable one, the kind of decency that existed even between enemies in that world. And Achilles, wild with grief for Patroclus, refuses it utterly. There can be no pacts between us, he snarls, no more than there can be oaths between lions and men. He wants Hector's body for himself, and then he drives his spear through the one gap in the armor he knows so well. Since it is his own armor Hector is wearing, and Hector, the shield of Troy, the good man in an unjust war, falls dying in the dust before the walls of his own city, with his father and mother watching from above. With his last breath, Hector begs again for his body to be returned to his family, and warns Achilles that his own death is now very near, that the day will come when Paris and the god Apollo will strike him down at these same gates. And Achilles tells him to die, and that he will accept his own fate whenever the gods send it. But first he will have his vengeance. Hector dies, and then Achilles does a thing so cruel that even the watching gods are offended by it. He strips the armor, and he pierces the dead man's ankles, and he binds Hector's body to the back of his chariot, and he drives it in the dust round and round the walls of Troy, dragging the corpse of the noblest Trojan through the dirt in full view of his screaming parents and his shrieking city, again and again refusing all decency, drunk on a grief that has curdled into savagery. This is the terrible truth at the center of Achilles. He is the greatest hero of the greatest war, and he is also here a monster made by loss, desecrating the body of a better man, because his own pride and grief have burned away everything gentle in him. Both things are true at once. The Greeks have won their greatest victory. Hector is dead, and with him dies Troy's real hope, because there was only ever one man great enough to hold the city, and now he is being dragged in the dust behind an enemy chariot. But the war is not over, and neither man's story is finished, because a grieving old king is about to do the bravest thing in the whole tale, walk unarmed into the tent of the man who killed his son. And Achilles' own death, promised and accepted, now stands very close indeed. The greatest warrior in the world has spent his vengeance. He has a little time left, and not much, before the arrow finds the one place on his body the Black River never touched. Vengeance felt like the answer right up until the moment he had it. Achilles killed the man who took Patroclus, and Patroclus was still dead, and now so very soon would he be. Grief does not trade. It only takes, and then takes again, takes again. An old man walks alone through the dark toward the Greek camp, unarmed, carrying nothing but a wagon of treasure and a father's grief. And he is going to kneel before the man who murdered his son. His name is Priam, king of Troy, and he is very old. He has watched from the walls as Achilles killed his son Hector, and dragged the body through the dust. And for days now Achilles has kept doing it, hitching the corpse to his chariot each morning, and defiling it before the city. A cruelty so extreme that even the gods on Olympus have grown disgusted, and decided it must stop. And so, with the gods' help guiding him unseen through the enemy lines, old Priam does the single bravest thing in the whole long war. He goes at night into the very heart of the Greek camp, into the tent of Achilles himself, to beg for the body of his son. Think of what this costs him. He is a king, and he lowers himself before his greatest enemy. He is an old man, and he walks into a camp full of soldiers who have every reason to kill him. He comes before Achilles, this monster who has slaughtered so many of his sons, and he does the most humbling thing a man can do. He kneels, and he takes Achilles' hands in his, and he kisses the hands that killed his child. And then he speaks. He tells Achilles to think of his own father, far away in Greece, an old man like Priam, waiting and hoping for his son to come home from the war. Think of how your father longs for you, Priam says. I am more wretched than he, for I have kissed the hands of the man who killed my sons. Give me back my boy. Let me bury him. And something breaks open in Achilles that has been sealed since Patroclus died. He looks at this weeping old king, and he thinks of his own father, whom he will never see again, and he thinks of Patroclus, and the grief that had turned to savagery turns back into grief, and to something human. And the greatest warrior in the world weeps together with the old man whose son he killed, the two of them crying in the tent, one for a dead son and one for a dead friend and his own coming death. And for a moment the war and the hatred fall away, and there is only shared human sorrow. This is the redemption of Achilles, small and late but real. He rises, and he gives the old king his son's body back, washed and wrapped with honor. And he grants Priam something more, a truce, 11 days of peace, so that Troy can properly mourn and bury Hector without fear of attack. Then he sends the old man safely home through the dark with his son, and so the greatest of the ancient poems, the tale of the wrath of Achilles, ends not with the fall of Troy at all, but with the funeral of Hector, the noble enemy, mourned by his city, burned on a great pyre, while his wife and mother and the whole of Troy weep for the shield that can no longer protect them. The war is not over, but the poem stops here on grief and grace, because the point was never the winning. The point was what the war did to the men inside it. The rest of the story the ancients told in other poems, and it moves quickly now toward the end, because with Hector dead, the doom of Troy is only a matter of time. Achilles does not have long. His own death was promised the moment he chose to kill Hector, and it comes as foretold. In the fighting that follows Hector's funeral, Paris, yes, that same Paris, the shepherd whose choice began all of this, the man who has done very little actual fighting while braver men died for his stolen bride, takes up a bow, and the god Apollo, who has hated the Greeks throughout and who promised Hector this very thing, guides Paris's arrow. It is not a great warrior's death. Achilles, the mightiest man in the world, the near invulnerable hero who cut through armies, is felled by an arrow loosed by the least warlike prince in Troy, guided by a god. Striking the one place on his whole body the waters of the Black River never touched, his heel. The one flaw, the single vulnerable point in an otherwise unkillable man. The arrow finds it, and Achilles falls, and the greatest warrior of the age dies at the Scaean gates exactly as Hector said he would, killed not by strength but by a hidden weakness, and a god's malice, and a coward's lucky shot. There is a terrible poetry in it. The man who chose a short blazing life over a long quiet one gets precisely what he chose. He burned brighter than anyone, and he burned out young in the dust before a city that is still not fallen, brought down by the one small vulnerability no one thought to fear. 3,000 years later, we still call a person's fatal weakness their Achilles heel, and now you know it is not a metaphor the Greeks invented lightly. It is the death of their greatest hero, remembered in a phrase we still speak without thinking. The Greeks fight a desperate battle over Achilles' body and manage to drag it back to camp, and they mourn him as the greatest of them all. And then a strange, sad quarrel breaks out, because Achilles left behind his divine armor, the god-forged armor, and it is to be awarded to the next greatest Greek warrior. 2 men claim it. One is Odysseus, the clever one. The other is a giant of a man named Ajax, enormous and powerful, the strongest Greek left alive, who fought valiantly to save Achilles' body. The armor is awarded to Odysseus, for his cunning is judged more valuable than Ajax's strength. And Ajax, the mighty warrior, is so shattered by the shame of losing, so consumed by wounded pride that his mind breaks. In his madness he turns on his own army, and when he comes to his senses and realizes what he has done, the shame is more than he can bear, and the strongest of the Greeks takes his own life. Another hero gone, not to a Trojan spear, but to pride, the same poison that killed so many in this war. So the great heroes are falling one by one. Hector is dead. Achilles is dead. Ajax is dead. 10 years have passed. A whole generation of the finest warriors on both sides buried in the dust of this plain, and still, impossibly, the walls of Troy stand. The Greeks are exhausted. They have lost their greatest champions. They are no closer to entering the city than they were on the first day. The war that everyone thought would take a season has consumed 10 years, and the lives of nearly every hero who came, and the god-built walls have held against all of it. Something has to break the deadlock because sheer force has failed completely. What is needed is not strength. What is needed is a trick, and the cleverest mind in Greece is still very much alive. Odysseus. He has watched the war grind on for a decade. He has seen strength fail again and again against those walls, and he understands, as the brute warriors never did, that Troy will not fall to any weapon. It will only fall to a lie. So Odysseus conceives the most famous trick in all of history, a scheme so audacious and so cruel that it has given us a phrase we still use for any hidden danger disguised as a gift. He proposes to build a horse, not a real horse, an enormous one, made of wood, hollow inside, a giant, beautiful, towering wooden horse, big enough to hide a company of armed men within its belly. The Greeks will build this thing and hide their best warriors inside it, and leave it standing on the plain before Troy as if it were an offering to the gods. And then, this is the master stroke, the entire Greek army will pack up their camp, board their ships, and sail away. They will vanish over the horizon. They will make it look, to the watching Trojans, as though the Greeks have finally given up after 10 long years, abandoned the siege, and gone home for good, leaving behind a great religious offering to ensure safe passage. But the ships will not go home. They will only sail out of sight to hide behind a nearby island and wait. And the Trojans, seeing the enemy gone at last after 10 years of terror, will do exactly what people do when a nightmare finally ends. They will celebrate, and they will look at this enormous, magnificent wooden horse standing before their gates, and they will want to bring it inside their city as a trophy of their victory and a gift for the gods who delivered them. And the men hidden in its belly will wait for night. It is a plan of breathtaking cynicism. It weaponizes the Trojans' own joy against them, their relief, their piety, their entirely reasonable desire to believe that 10 years of horror are finally over. Odysseus is betting the whole war on the hope that a people desperate for the nightmare to end will talk themselves into welcoming the very thing that will destroy them. And here is the tragedy waiting inside the trick. The thing you already know is coming, because we have been building to it since the very first night. There are people in Troy who will see through it. There are voices who will scream that the horse is a trap, that the Greeks have not really gone, that to bring this thing inside the walls is to bring death itself through the gates. And no one will listen to them, because one of those voices belongs to a princess whom the gods long ago cursed so that her every true prophecy would fall on deaf ears. Cassandra, still right, still doomed to be disbelieved. She has been standing in the background of this whole story since the beginning, weeping over ships and warning of fire. And now, at the very end, she will get her final and most terrible vindication. She will look at the wooden horse and know exactly what is inside it and what it means. And she will scream the truth to her whole city. And her whole city will laugh and roll the horse through the gates anyway. The Greeks built a lie big enough to walk through the front door. All Troy had to do was leave it outside. But the city had been afraid for 10 years, and a people that tired will believe almost anything that promises the fear is finally over. That was the real trap, not the wood, and not the men inside it. The hope inside it. The hope. Morning comes to Troy, and for the first time in 10 years the plain is empty. And the people climb the walls and stare at a horizon with no Greek ships on it. And they begin, cautiously, to hope. The camp is gone, where for a decade there stood a sprawling city of enemy tents and earthworks and beached ships. There is now only churned earth and the cold ashes of abandoned fires. The Greeks have vanished. The sea is empty, and standing alone before the gates, enormous against the morning sky, is the horse, a towering thing of wood, beautifully made, taller than the walls in some tellings, magnificent and strange and silent. The Trojans come out through their gates for the first time in years without fear, walking the empty battlefield where so many of their sons died, hardly able to believe it. The war is over. The Greeks have given up and gone home, and they have left behind this astonishing offering, and the Trojans gather around it and begin to argue about what to do with it. Most of them want to bring it into the city. It is beautiful. It appears to be a gift to the gods, and to seize an enemy's abandoned offering and dedicate it in your own temples is a sweet and fitting victory. After 10 years of siege, they want their trophy. They want to haul this great symbol of their deliverance up through the streets and set it in the heart of Troy as proof that they survived, that they won, that the God-built walls held to the very end. It is a completely human impulse. They have earned a celebration, and here is the centerpiece of it. Standing at their gates, but not everyone is fooled, and this is where the last warnings come, and where they are ignored one final catastrophic time. There is a priest in Troy named Laocoon, a priest of the god of the sea, and he takes one look at this horse, and he is filled with dread. He warns the crowd not to trust it. He does not know exactly what the trick is, but he knows a trick when he sees one, and he speaks the words that echo down 3,000 years. Beware of Greeks bearing gifts. Do not trust this thing. The Greeks are cunning above all peoples, and an enemy's gift is the most dangerous gift of all. And to prove his point, or in fury, Laocoon hurls his spear at the flank of the wooden horse, and the spear strikes the hollow belly with a great booming, echoing sound, the unmistakable sound of empty space inside, of a hollow chamber where solid wood should be. If anyone had been listening, that sound alone should have ended it. Something is inside the horse. Everyone heard it, but the gods have decided Troy will fall, and the gods make sure no one heeds the warning. As Laocoon stands there, having just revealed the horse's hollow secret, 2 enormous serpents come surging out of the sea, and they seize the priest and his 2 young sons, and they crush all 3 of them to death in their coils in front of the entire city, and then vanish. And the Trojans, watching this horror, draw exactly the wrong conclusion. They decide the gods have punished Laocoon for striking the sacred horse with his spear. They decide his terrible death is proof that the horse is holy and must be honored, when in truth it is the gods silencing the one man trying to save them. The warning becomes, in their frightened minds, a reason to do the very opposite of what he said. They resolve to bring the horse inside Dot, and then Cassandra makes her last stand, and it is the most heartbreaking moment in her whole cursed life. She has been right about everything, for the entire war, and believed about nothing. Now she looks at the horse, and she sees with her perfect doomed sight exactly what is inside it, and exactly what will happen tonight. She sees the armed men in the belly. She sees them climbing out in the dark. She sees the gates thrown open, and the Greek army pouring back through them. She sees the fire and the slaughter and the end of everything. And she screams it to her people, all of it, plainly. There are soldiers inside. This is the end of Troy. do not bring it in. For the love of the gods, do not bring it through the gates. She is a princess of Troy, the daughter of the king, and she is telling her city the literal exact truth about the thing that is about to kill them all, and they laugh at her, because that is her curse. They call her mad, as they always have. Poor Cassandra, raving again. They ignore the princes who can see the future, and heed instead their own desperate hope. And they take ropes and rollers, and with great celebration and singing, the people of Troy haul the wooden horse up to their gates. It is too large to fit through in some tellings, so they actually tear down part of their own beloved walls, the God-built walls that no enemy could breach in 10 years of war. They break their own walls open with their own hands to bring the horse inside. They demolish their only protection to welcome their own destruction, cheering as they do it. And they roll the horse through the breach, up through the streets, into the heart of the city, and they crown it with flowers, and they dedicate it to the gods. And then they throw the greatest celebration Troy has ever seen. They have no idea they are dancing on their own graves. All day and long into the night the city feasts. 10 years of terror and grief pour out of them, and one enormous release of joy. They drink, they sing, they dance in the streets and garland the horse, and thank the gods for their deliverance. They drink far too much, because why not? The nightmare is finally over, and one by one, deep into the night, the exhausted, drunken, joyful people of Troy fall asleep. The feasting dies down, the torches gutter, the singing fades, and at last the whole great city lies still and dark and utterly defenseless, its people sleeping off the celebration of their own doom, its walls broken open, its gates unguarded, its enemy inside the very center of it, waiting, inside the horse. The men wait for the sounds to die. They have been crouched in that cramped wooden belly all day and all night. In the dark, in the heat and silence, some of the greatest warriors left alive in Greece, Odysseus among them, the architect of it all. They have listened to everything. They heard Lausun's spear boom against the hull and held their breath. They heard Cassandra scream the exact truth about them and prayed no one would listen. They heard the city celebrating, the singing and the dancing, the 10-year enemy reveling in a victory that was never real. And they have waited, sweating in the dark, for the sound of a city falling asleep. And now, at last, in the deep silence of the small hours, they hear it. Nothing. Troy is asleep. Troy is drunk and dreaming and helpless. It is time. It is time. Quietly, the men lower themselves out of the horse into the sleeping city. They drop down into the dark streets of Troy, into the very heart of the enemy's stronghold, unopposed, and they move at once to the great gates. And out on the water, the Greek fleet that only pretended to leave has slipped back to the shore under cover of night. The whole army is there, in the dark, waiting for one signal. The men from the horse creep to the gates of Troy, and they overpower the few guards, and they throw the great gates wide open, and a signal fire flares up on the walls, and the entire Greek army, 10 years of thwarted rage behind them, Comes pouring silently through the open gates and the broken walls into the sleeping, drunken, defenseless city. What follows is the sack of Troy, and it is the darkest thing in the whole story, and we will not linger in its cruelty, because the horror of it is best left in shadow. The Greeks fall upon a city that cannot defend itself. The Trojans wake from their celebration to find the enemy already inside the walls, already in the streets, already at their doors, and there is no army to stop them because there are no walls anymore, no warning heeded, no defense prepared. The fighting is desperate and hopeless. Troy, the great and shining city that held for 10 years against the mightiest army ever assembled, falls in a single night, not to strength, never to strength, but to a trick and a lie and the terrible human willingness to believe that a nightmare is finally over. The city burns. The prophecy that hung over Paris from before his birth comes true at last, exactly as his mother dreamed it in the beginning, the flame that spread from her arms and consumed all of Troy. He was the torch. He was always the torch. The shepherd's choice on the mountainside, the stolen bride, the 10 years of war, the deaths of Hector and Achilles and Ajax, and countless thousands more, all of it burning now in one final night of fire, the towers falling, the God-built walls thrown down, the great city that gods raised reduced to ash and memory dot, and through the burning streets, the royal house of Troy meets its end. Old King Priam, who walked so bravely into Achilles' tent, dies in the fall of his city. Cassandra, right to the very end, right about everything, is taken. Hector's wife Andromache, who stood weeping on the walls, and Hector's baby son, the childish father set down his terrible helmet to kiss. Their fates are among the saddest in the whole tale, and the poets who told them wept as they wrote. The women of Troy, the queens and princesses, are led away into captivity as the city that was their whole world falls to ruin behind them. An entire civilization, ancient and proud and beautiful, ends in a single night of fire because a goddess was not invited to a wedding and threw down a golden apple, and a shepherd chose love over wisdom and power both. But not everyone in Troy dies that night. In the chaos and the fire, one Trojan prince gathers his aged father onto his back and takes his young son by the hand and fights his way out of the burning city, escaping into the dark with a small band of survivors. His name is Aeneas, and the gods have other plans for him. He does not know it yet, fleeing through the flames with his father on his shoulders, but he carries the future with him. Out of the ashes of Troy, this one survivor will sail west, across many years and many trials, and his descendants, the myths would later say, will found a new city on distant shores, a city called Rome. So the fall of Troy is not only an ending, it is a seed. The greatest empire the ancient world would ever know traces its own legend back to a single prince walking out of these flames with his father on his back. But that is another story for other nights. Tonight the great city burns, and the age of its heroes burns with it. The golden apple has done all its work at last. Everything it touched is ash. 10 years of war, and it did not come down to the strongest arm or the sharpest sword. It came down to a hollow horse and a sleeping city, and a truth nobody wanted to hear. Troy had every warning it needed. What it did not have was the will to believe them. Believe them. The ships that sailed home from Troy carried men who had won everything, and the sea and the gods spent the next 10 years teaching them that winning a war is not the same as being allowed to come home from one. Troy has fallen. The war is over, and you would think after 10 years of siege and slaughter The survivors would simply sail back to Greece, to their waiting families in their warm halls, and grow old telling stories by the fire. But that is not how this age ends, because the sack of Troy was not clean. In the madness of that final night, the Greeks did terrible things. They killed suppliants at altars. They defiled temples. They committed the kind of cruelty that the gods, even the gods who wanted Troy to fall, cannot let pass unpunished. And so the journey home becomes its own long ordeal, a scattering of the victorious fleet across a hostile sea, storm and shipwreck and exile and death, the gods collecting a price for the excesses of the sack. The Greeks called this the nostoi, the homecomings, and most of them are tragedies. Consider Agamemnon, the high king, the man who commanded the whole vast enterprise, who sacrificed his own daughter at Aulis to buy a wind. He survives the war. He survives the sea. He sails home to Mycenae in triumph, the conqueror of Troy, the greatest king in Greece, returning at last after 10 long years, bringing home captured treasure and captured princesses, expecting a hero's welcome. He has forgotten his wife. Remember Clytemnestra, standing on the shore at Aulis all those years ago, watching the fleet carry away the husband who had just murdered their child. She has not forgotten. For 10 years she has ruled Mycenae in his absence, and for 10 years she has nursed her hatred like a coal she never let go cold, remembering the bridal dress that was a lie and the altar and the knife. And in those 10 years she has taken a lover, a man with his own bitter grudge against Agamemnon's family, and together they have waited and planned for the day the conquering king would come home. Agamemnon walks back into his own palace in triumph, and his wife greets him with every appearance of joy, and she draws him a warm bath to wash away the dust of his long journey. And there, unarmed and defenseless in his own home, at the hands of the wife whose daughter he killed, the great king who conquered Troy is murdered on the very day of his return. He crossed the whole world and back and died in his own bathhouse, because the war he thought he left behind at Aulis had been waiting for him at home the entire time. That is the pattern of these homecomings. The war does not end when the fighting stops. It follows the men home and finishes them there. And the murder of Agamemnon does not even end his family's suffering. It sets off a whole further chain of vengeance. His son one day returning to avenge his father by killing his own mother, and then being hunted by the spirits of vengeance for the crime of matricide. A cycle of blood begetting blood that runs on for another generation. The house of the man who led the Greeks to victory tears itself apart from the inside. There is no triumph here, only consequence. And then there is the other great homecoming, the most famous of all, the one that takes the longest and becomes its own vast epic, the journey of Odysseus, the cleverest man in Greece, the architect of the wooden horse, the one whose trick finally won the war after 10 years of failed force. His reward for that cleverness is 10 more years lost at sea, unable to find his way home. Remember the prophecy from the very beginning, when he tried to escape the war by feigning madness on the beach of Ithaca. He was warned that if he went to Troy, he would be gone 20 years and return alone, stripped of everything. 10 years of war, and now 10 years of wandering. The prophecy is exact. Odysseus wanted more than anything to go home to his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus, and the gods make him earn that homecoming across a decade of trials, so strange and so famous that they have never left the human imagination. His wanderings are their own night of stories, and we will only touch them lightly here. He and his men, trying to sail home from Troy, are blown off course into a world of monsters and magic at the edges of the map. They are trapped in the cave of a one-eyed giant, a cyclops, and Odysseus escapes only by his wits, blinding the monster and hiding his men under the bellies of sheep. But in his pride he cannot resist taunting the giant as he sails away, shouting his own name across the water. And the Cyclops, who is a son of the sea god Poseidon, calls down his father's curse. And so Poseidon himself, god of the sea Odysseus must cross to get home, becomes his enemy, and the sea turns against him at every turn. He loses men to a witch who turns them into swine. He sails past the sirens, whose song lures sailors to their deaths on the rocks, and survives only by having himself lashed to the mast so he can hear the song without steering toward it. He threads a passage between two horrors, a many-headed monster on one side and a devouring whirlpool on the other, and loses men to both. He journeys in the strangest passage of all, down to the very edge of the underworld, to speak with the spirits of the dead, and there he meets the shades of the war. He meets the spirit of Achilles among the dead, and speaks with him. And here the myth says something that undoes the whole idea of the heroic age in a single moment. Odysseus, trying to comfort the ghost of Achilles, tells him not to grieve at being dead, for surely he rules as a mighty prince among the dead, as he once did among the living, honored even in death as the greatest of heroes. And Achilles, the man who chose a short, blazing life of eternal glory over a long, quiet one, who gave up everything for his name to be sung forever, the ghost of Achilles answers with the most heartbreaking lines in all of Greek myth. He says he would rather be alive a poor servant, a landless laborer working for a hired wage on some other man's farm, the lowest and most wretched of living men, than to be king over all the glorious dead. He would trade every scrap of his immortal fame, all of it, just to be alive again, breathing under the sun, even in poverty, even in disgrace. Sit with what that means. The greatest hero of the greatest war, given the chance to speak from beyond death, says the glory was not worth it. Says he would trade his eternal name for one more ordinary day of being alive. The whole value system of the heroic age. Die young, win glory, be remembered forever. Achilles himself, from the far side of death, calls it a bad bargain. That is the age beginning to end. That is the myth quietly turning away from its own gods and heroes, and toward something more human, more humble, more true. Glory is cold comfort in the dark. Being alive is the thing. A poor living man is richer than a glorious dead one. The heroes are starting to sound like people. Odysseus climbs back up out of the underworld and sails on, and one by one he loses the last of his men, until at last he alone survives, exactly as the prophecy promised. Alone, stripped of everything, his ships gone, his crew gone, washed up as a nameless castaway on distant shores. It takes him years more to finally reach home, and when he does at last set foot again on his own island of Ithaca, after 20 years away, he arrives not as a conquering hero, but as a beggar, alone and in disguise, unrecognized by his own people. Everything the prophecy foretold on that beach 2 decades before. What he finds at home is its own final trial. And it is here that the age of heroes truly begins to give way to the age of ordinary human life. Because the last battle Odysseus fights is not against monsters or gods or the walls of Troy. It is for his own house, his own wife, his own quiet domestic life, against men who have tried to steal it while he was gone. And that homecoming and what it means for the ending of an entire age of the world is where this last long night is heading. 20 years he spent trying to get back to an ordinary life. The war taught him how to win, the sea taught him how to survive, and the dead taught him the only lesson that mattered, that the ordinary life was the prize all along, and he had sailed past it to go to war. The heroes were finally learning what the rest of us are born knowing. Asterisk, a ragged old beggar limps up to the gates of a great house on the island of Ithaca, and no one knows that the king has come home, least of all the men who have spent years trying to take his place. Odysseus has finally reached his own island after 20 years, but he cannot simply walk into his hall and announce himself, because his home has been invaded, not by an army, but by something more insidious. In the long years everyone believed him dead. More than 100 noblemen from Ithaca and the islands around it moved into his palace as suitors for his wife Penelope. They have taken over his home. They sit in his halls day after day, eating his food, drinking his wine, slaughtering his cattle, courting his wife, and squandering his son's inheritance. All of them waiting for Penelope to finally give up hope and choose one of them as her new husband and the new lord of Ithaca. They are arrogant and greedy and lawless, and they have made themselves at home in another man's life, certain the true owner is never coming back. But Penelope has not given up, and here she becomes one of the great figures of the whole story, because her heroism is not the heroism of the battlefield. It is the quieter, harder heroism of faithfulness and cunning, of holding on. For all these years she has refused the suitors, and she has held them off with a trick worthy of her clever husband. She told them she would choose a new husband only after she finished weaving a great burial shroud for Odysseus's aged father. And every day she sat at her loom and wove, and every night, in secret, she crept back and unraveled the work she had done that day. For 3 years she wove a shroud that never grew, keeping over 100 aggressive men at bay with nothing but patience and a loom and a lie, until a treacherous servant finally revealed the trick. Penelope, waiting 20 years, faithful against all reason, out enduring an invasion of her home. She is the still heart. The whole long journey has been sailing toward Dot, and now her husband is home, disguised as a beggar, walking unrecognized through his own halls to see with his own eyes what has become of his house. And what he sees fills him with a cold and patient fury. He watches the suitors feast on his wealth. He watches them mock and abuse him, this ragged old beggar, kicking him, throwing things at him, treating a stranger at their door with a cruelty that in that world was itself an offense against the gods. Remember the sacred law of hospitality, the very law Paris broke to start the whole war. The suitors have made themselves at home by violating every rule of decency, and they have no idea that the shabby old man they are abusing is the master of the house, the sacker of Troy, the man who has killed more people than any of them will ever meet. standing quietly among them and counting every insult. Only a few recognize him or come to. His old dog, ancient now and dying on a dung heap, lifts its head and knows its master after 20 years and wags its tail one last time, and dies, one of the most quietly devastating moments in all of literature. The faithful animal that waited its whole life just to see him come home. An old nurse recognizes him by a scar. His son Telemachus, now grown, learns the truth. And together this small band, the true king and his son, and a couple of loyal servants, plan the reckoning. It comes through a contest. Penelope, believing herself finally out of tricks, at last agrees to a challenge to choose her new husband. She brings out the great bow of Odysseus, a mighty bow that only he was ever strong enough to string, and she declares that she will marry whichever suitor can string the bow and shoot an arrow through a line of axe heads, a feat of strength and skill that was her husband's signature. One by one the arrogant suitors try, and one by one they fail. None of them can even bend the great bow enough to string it, let alone make the shot. They strain and sweat and fail, these men who thought themselves worthy to take the king's place, unable to so much as string the king's bow. And then the ragged old beggar asks if he might try. The suitors laugh at him. Of course, a filthy old vagrant, presuming to attempt what strong young noblemen could not. But he insists, and the bow is handed to him, and the whole hall watches with contempt, and the old beggar takes the great bow of Odysseus, and with an ease that stops every laugh in every throat, he bends it and strings it effortlessly, and turns it in his hands, and sends an arrow flying clean through all the axe heads in a single perfect shot. And in that instant the disguise falls away, and the suitors understand, all at once and far too late, exactly who has been standing in their midst. The beggar is Odysseus. The king has come home, and now he is armed with the one weapon in the hall that only he can use. And there is nowhere for them to run, because Telemachus and the loyal servants have already secured the doors and hidden away the suitors' weapons. What follows is the last battle of the heroic age, and it is fought not on a foreign plain for a stolen queen, but in a man's own dining hall to reclaim his own home. Odysseus and his son turn the great bow and then spear and sword on the trapped suitors, and they cut them down, all 100 and more of them, in a reckoning years in the making, cleansing the house of the men who tried to steal his life while he was away. It is bloody and total. The invaders who feasted so long on another man's wealth pay for every day of it in a single terrible hour. And when it is done, the hall is his again. The house is clean. Odysseus stands in his own home at last, master of it once more after 20 years. And then comes the moment the entire 20-year journey has truly been sailing toward. And it is not the battle. It is a quiet conversation between a husband and a wife who have not seen each other in 2 decades. Penelope does not simply run into his arms, because Penelope is as clever and careful as her husband, and she has been fooled before, and she will not be fooled now by a man merely claiming to be Odysseus. So she tests him. She pretends to order their marriage bed moved out of their chamber for him to sleep on, and Odysseus, not knowing it is a test, reacts with dismay, because he knows that bed cannot be moved. He built it himself long ago around the living trunk of an olive tree still rooted in the ground, so that one of its bedposts is a growing tree, and the whole bed is fixed forever to the earth. Only the real Odysseus could know that secret, the secret of their own marriage bed, and when he describes it, Penelope finally knows beyond all doubt that her husband has truly come home. And the two of them, after 20 years of war and wandering and waiting, hold each other and weep, reunited at last in the bed built around a living tree, rooted to the ground, the symbol of a marriage that could not be moved. That is where the great story ends. Not with glory, not with a burning city or a hero's death, with an aging husband and a faithful wife holding each other in a quiet room, home at last. After all the gods and monsters, all the war and the wandering, the whole vast epic comes to rest on the most ordinary and most precious human thing there is: two people who love each other, together again, safe home. The heroic age has told us its final lesson, and it is the opposite of the golden apple. It is not beauty, and it is not glory, and it is not power. It is a warm bed and a faithful heart, and the simple miracle of coming home to someone who waited. And with that homecoming, the age of heroes quietly closes, because look at what has happened across these long nights. The gods who once walked openly among men and married mortal kings and fathered heroes have grown distant. The great heroes, the children of gods, are almost all dead now. Achilles in the dust, Hector at the gates, Ajax by his own hand, Agamemnon in his bath. A whole generation of the mightiest warriors the world would ever see, all gone, buried in foreign dirt or murdered at home. The demigods are passing out of the world, and no new ones are rising to take their place. The distance between heaven and earth is widening. Soon the gods will withdraw entirely into their own realm, and stop meddling in mortal affairs and stop fathering children on mortal women, and the earth will be left to ordinary human beings, living ordinary human lives, with no divine blood in their veins and no gods walking beside them. The Trojan War is the hinge. It is the great and terrible event that the ancient Greeks placed right at the border between the age of myth and the age of history. Before it, the world is full of gods and monsters and heroes. After it, the world begins to look like our world, a world of ordinary people, without magic, making their way through history on their own. The heroes fought their last great war, and won it, and died in it, and the winning of it used them all up. There were simply no more heroes left after Troy. The age had spent itself, and so the myths hand the world over to us, to ordinary human beings. The gods step back. The heroes fall silent. The magic drains slowly out of the world, and what remains is history, our history, the long human story of people without divine blood, doing their best under a sky that has gone quiet. The Greeks looked back at the Trojan War as the last blaze of a golden age, the final chapter before the gods left and mortals were on their own. It is where their mythology ends and their history begins. There is something almost gentle in it once you see it. The age of heroes does not end in some final catastrophe, some great destruction. It ends the way a long day ends, the great figures growing tired, the fighting finally over, the gods dimming like torches burning down, and at the very last, one weary man coming home to one faithful woman in a quiet room, and the world settling into the long ordinary night of human history, that we are still living in now. The golden apple rolled to a stop 3,000 years ago, and everything it set in motion has finally come to rest. And what it left behind, when all the gods and heroes had gone, was simply us that the age of myth did not shatter. It just grew quiet and handed the world to ordinary people, and let the gods fade like the last light going out of a long, long day. And here we still are, under that same quiet sky, telling the old stories in the dark, telling the old stories in the dark. The gods sit on Olympus in the years after Troy and feel, for the first time in their long existence, that the world below them is slipping quietly out of their hands, and there is nothing even a god can do to hold on to a thing whose time has come. For as long as anyone could remember, heaven and earth had been close. The gods came down to walk among mortals, disguised as travelers and beggars, shepherds and swans. They fell in love with mortal men and women. They fathered children who were half divine, the heroes, and the great blazing figures who fought monsters and founded cities and pulled down the walls of Troy. The world was a place where you might meet a god on the road without knowing it, where the son of your neighbor might be the son of Zeus, where the boundary between the human and the divine was thin enough to step across. That was the age of myth, and it is ending now in the long quiet after the greatest war, and the gods can feel it ending, because the heroes are gone. Almost all of them died at Troy or in the terrible homecomings after, and the ones who survived are old now, and dying of old age the way ordinary men die. And here is the thing the gods slowly come to understand. No new heroes are being born. The great demigods, the children of gods and mortals, are passing out of the world, and the gods are no longer making more. The reason why is one of the deepest and saddest ideas in all of Greek myth, and it explains the whole closing of the age. The gods are withdrawing on purpose. They are pulling back from the mortal world, ending the age of mingling, because the age of heroes has shown them something terrible about what happens when gods and mortals mix too closely. Look at what that mingling produced. It produced Achilles, the greatest hero who ever lived, and it produced his death in the dust. His mother, the sea goddess, grieving a son she could not save. It produced Helen, the daughter of Zeus, the most beautiful woman in the world, and her beauty burned a city to the ground and killed tens of thousands of men. It produced the whole Trojan War, 10 years of slaughter that began at a wedding of a goddess and a mortal. A marriage that should have been a joy, and instead threw a golden apple into the world that rolled all the way to the fall of Troy. The mingling of gods and mortals over and over produced glory and produced catastrophe in equal measure, and the catastrophe grew and grew until it consumed an entire age. There is even an old idea in the myths that the gods engineered the Trojan War on purpose to thin out the race of heroes, because the demigods had grown too many and too mighty, and the earth itself groaned under their weight. Whether the gods planned it or simply let it happen, the result is the same. The heroes are being cleared from the world. The age is being brought to a close, and so the gods make a choice, the great final choice of Greek mythology, though no single moment marks it, and no poem announces it with trumpets. They choose to step back, to withdraw to Olympus and stop walking among mortals, stop falling in love with them, stop fathering children on them. to let the thin boundary between heaven and earth thicken and harden until it can no longer be crossed. The gods do not die. The Greeks never said their gods died. They simply retreat. They go home to their mountain and their heaven, and they close the door between their world and ours, and they leave the earth to the ordinary human beings who remain. It is a kind of divine retirement, a great stepping away, and it is done in the myths with something almost like sorrow, because the gods are giving up something they loved. They loved the mortal world. They loved coming down into it, and they are choosing to leave it, because they have seen what their presence in it costs. Think of it from the mortal side, and it becomes even more poignant. For the ordinary people left behind, the world is becoming a lonelier place. Their grandparents lived in an age when gods walked the earth and heroes strode across it, and the divine was near enough to touch. And now that is ending. The gods are pulling away. The heroes are dying out. The magic is draining slowly from the world, and what is left is a quieter, plainer, more human place. A place where you will not meet a god on the road, where no child will be born half divine, where mortals must face the world with only their own mortal strength and their own mortal wits. The age of wonders is closing, and an age of ordinary human life is opening, and the people living through the change can feel the wonder receding like a tide going out, leaving the world drier and plainer and more alone. But it is not only loss, and this is the deep wisdom the Greeks folded into the ending of their myths, that the closing of the age of gods and heroes is also the opening of the age of human beings, and that there is something dignified, even beautiful, in a world that must stand on its own. As long as the gods walked the earth and the heroes fought the great battles, ordinary people were small figures in the background of someone else's story, minor characters in the dramas of demigods. But once the gods withdraw and the heroes die out, the ordinary people move to the center. The story becomes theirs. Human history, real history, the history of ordinary men and women building and farming and trading and loving and dying without any divine blood or divine help, begins precisely here, where the myths end. The gods hand the world over to us, and that handing over is not only a loss, it is an inheritance. The Greeks marked this handover with the whole vision of the ages of the world, an old and beautiful idea. They imagined that the world had passed through a series of ages, each one further from the gods than the last. First, there had been a golden age, long ago, when mortals lived like gods themselves without toil or sorrow, when the earth gave its fruits freely, and no one grew old in pain. Then a silver age, lesser than the first. Then a bronze age, harder and more warlike. And then, and this is the beautiful part, an age of heroes, the age of the demigods, the age of Troy, a brief, bright return of greatness before the final decline. The Trojan War belongs to that age of heroes, the last age when the world still held greatness in it, the last blaze of the old glory. And after the age of heroes comes the age the Greeks believed they themselves were living in, the Iron Age, the hardest and plainest of all, an age of ordinary toil and ordinary sorrow, the age with no gods walking in it and no heroes striding across it, the age of simply being human in a world that has grown quiet. We are still in that age. That is what the Greeks would say. The Iron Age never ended. The gods withdrew after Troy and never came back. The heroes died, and no more were born. And every ordinary human life lived since then. All of history, all of us, belongs to that long, quiet age that opened when the age of myth closed. When you read these old stories, you are looking back across that boundary, back into the age of wonders from inside the age of the ordinary, back at the gods and heroes from a world they have long since left. And there is a particular feeling in that backward look, a mix of loss and longing and a strange kind of comfort, the feeling of a grown person looking back at the bright, impossible stories of childhood, knowing they were never quite real and loving them anyway, and knowing too that the plainer real world we grew into has a quiet worth of its own dot, so the Trojan War is not only a war, it is a doorway. It is the great hinge on which the whole imagined history of the world turns. The moment the Greeks placed at the exact border between the time of myth and the time of history, between the age when gods walked among us and the age when they left us to ourselves. Before it, the world is enchanted. After it, the world is ours. And the story of how that doorway was passed through, how the last great war was fought and won, and how it used up the last of the heroes and hastened the withdrawal of the gods, is the story of how the age of myth came quietly to its close, and handed the long ordinary night of human history to us, the ones who came after, the ones still telling the tales in the dark. The gods did not slam the door on their way out. They closed it softly, the way you close a door on a sleeping child, and then they were gone, and the world they left behind was quieter, and plainer, and ours, and plainer, and ours. 3,000 years have passed since anyone first told the story of Troy, and the strangest thing about it is not that we still remember it, but that a war the Greeks placed at the edge of myth turned out to have a grain of something real buried at the bottom of it. For most of the last 2,000 years, learned people assumed the whole thing was a beautiful fiction. Troy, the golden apple, the wooden horse, the wrath of Achilles, a magnificent story, but a story, a poem, no more historical than the gods who moved through it. There was no Troy, the scholars said. There was no war. It was all the invention of poets, a myth dressed up as history. And to go looking for the real Troy was the errand of a dreamer or a fool. And then, in the 1870s, a wealthy and obsessive amateur named Heinrich Schliemann, who had loved the story of Troy since childhood and refused to believe it was only a story, went digging on a hill in what is now western Turkey, a place called Hizarlik, where he was convinced the city had really stood. And he found it. He found a city. More than that, he found many cities, layer upon layer, one built on the ruins of the last, going back thousands of years, an ancient fortified city that had been destroyed and rebuilt again and again across the centuries, exactly where the old poems said Troy should be, guarding exactly the strategic straits the poems described. Later and more careful archaeologists refined his messy, treasure-hungry work, and what they found beneath that hill was remarkable. There really was a great and wealthy city there in the Bronze Age. It really did guard the vital sea, passage between two worlds. It really was destroyed, at least one of its layers, around the time the Greeks remembered the Trojan War happening. Some of it by fire, some showing signs of violence and siege. Now, this does not mean the myth is true. There is no evidence of a golden apple, no wooden horse buried in the ruins, no bones of Achilles, no proof that a woman named Helen ever launched a single ship. The gods and heroes remain firmly in the realm of poetry. But underneath the poetry, it seems there is a real place, and possibly a real memory, a memory of a real Bronze Age city, in a real strategic location that really was besieged and burned in the dim ancient past. A memory passed down through centuries of oral storytelling, growing and changing and gathering gods and heroes to itself as it traveled through time, until the poets shaped it into the great myth we know. The story of Troy may be at its very core a true story that spent 1,000 years turning into a legend, a real war remembered so long and so lovingly that it became myth. That is a haunting thought to hold in the dark, that somewhere under all the magic there really was a burning city, and the people who survived it told their children, who told their children, who told their children, across 100 generations, until the burning city became the fall of Troy. And that is a fitting note on which to think about what these stories are, and why we still tell them, and why they still matter 3,000 years on. Because the story of the Trojan War is not really about gods and heroes at all. In the end, it is about us. Every figure in it, for all their divine blood and impossible deeds, is doing something deeply and recognizably human. Paris chooses desire over wisdom, the way people choose the thing they want over the thing they need, and pays for it, and so does everyone around him. Agamemnon sacrifices what he loves for power and ambition, and the sacrifice poisons the rest of his life. The way the things we give up for success have a way of coming back to collect. Achilles lets his wounded pride override his judgment and his mercy, and it kills the person he loves most, the way our own pride, unchecked, damages the people closest to us. Hector does his duty and protects his family, knowing it will probably destroy him, the way ordinary people quietly carry impossible responsibilities out of love. Cassandra tells the truth and is not believed, the way honest voices are so often dismissed until it is too late. Odysseus wants nothing in all the world but to go home, the way we all, in the end, just want to get home to the people who love us. Penelope waits and stays faithful and endures the way love endures. These are not the concerns of gods. These are the concerns of human beings, of every human being who has ever lived, dressed up in bronze armor and set against the walls of a burning city so that we could see our own hearts more clearly by looking at them from a little distance. That is what myth is for. That is why the Greeks told these stories, and why we still tell them, and why a war at the edge of history became the foundation of an entire literature. The myths take the things that are hardest to look at directly, desire and pride and grief and duty and death and the longing for home, and they wrap them in story, in gods and heroes and monsters and magic, so that we can hold them and turn them over and understand them without being overwhelmed by them. The fall of Troy is the fall of every proud thing that ever believed itself safe. The homecoming of Odysseus is every person who ever fought their way back to the people they love. The withdrawal of the gods is every person growing up and out of the enchanted world of childhood into the plainer, harder, more real world of being an adult, and learning that the plainer world, for all it has lost, is the one where the real living gets done. And so the age of myth ends, and hands the world to us, and we take it, the way every generation takes the world from the one before. The gods have withdrawn to their mountain. The heroes lie under the dust of a foreign plain. The great city has fallen and burned and been forgotten and been found again, a mound of ancient stone on a Turkish hill, its story living on in words far longer than its walls lived on in the world. Everything the golden apple set in motion has finally come to its rest. And what remains when the gods have gone quiet and the heroes have fallen silent, and the last light of the old age has gone out, is simply the world we live in now, ordinary and unmagical and precious, and the old stories we tell in the dark to remind ourselves who we are and where we came from and what it means to be a human being under a quiet sky. The heroes are gone. The gods have gone home. And here, 3,000 years later, we still gather in the dark to hear the old tale one more time, the wedding, and the apple, and the shepherd's choice, and the 1,000 ships, and the 10 long years, and the wooden horse, and the fire, and the long roads home. We tell it the way people have always told it, softly, at the end of the day, as the light goes down and the world grows still, passing it on across the centuries the way the survivors of a real burning city once passed on the memory of what they had seen dot, and now the story is told, and the fire has burned low, and the age of heroes has closed once more, the way it closes every time the tale is finished, gently, quietly, with the gods fading like the last light of a lone day, and the world settling into the soft and ordinary dark. The apple has come to rest. The heroes are sleeping, and so soon will you. The old stories never really end. They just grow quiet and wait in the dark and rise again the next time someone needs to hear them. Sleep now. The heroes will keep. They always have. They always have.